All right, we are live. Today, we're going to talk about how to organize uncertainty into order, how to make better decisions, and going corporate to creative by interviewing Sheng Huang, an ex-Google strategist and mind mapping expert. Welcome to The Inner Creator with Peter Su. We're a podcast dedicated to helping creative entrepreneurs learn more about the art and business of being a creator. Ultimately, we want to help you improve your inner strength, your mindset, confidence, and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Peter Su. I'm a former investment banker at Goldman Sachs, turned singer-songwriter, turned content creator here in San Francisco. And today, our special guest is my friend Sheng Huang. You guys are in for a treat. He's one of the most interesting, intentional, and productive people I know. Sheng is a mind mapper, writer, and YouTuber from San Francisco, where he coaches working professionals to discover their purpose and project manage their lives for more fulfilling and productive lives. His superpower is breaking down chaos into order with structured thinking. Sheng is one of those rare people that's blended together his inner work and all the external tools that he learned while being a corporate strategist at Google, at Niantic Labs, the 30th employee there. They're the company that built Pokemon Go, and closing multi-million-dollar BD deals at an AI startup, and also graduating #1 in his MBA class at the London Business School. And most importantly, he graduated from UC Berkeley, so go Bears. And on top of all this, Sheng has over 20,000 subscribers on YouTube. He literally wrote the book, Mind Mapping Fundamentals, and he runs the Mind Map Nation, a community focused on bringing together connected thinkers. So Sheng, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on here. I feel like for anyone that has any uncertainty, complexity, chaos in their lives, and they want to think about it in a structured way and bring order to it, I feel like this is going to help me and a lot of people so much. So thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely, Peter. No, thanks for having me. This is going to be super fun. I mean, speaking of chaos, it's a chaotic world out there these days.
Yeah. When are you going to do the SVB chaos breakdown, the mind map? You've done COVID.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of time. Honestly, it's interesting. My first instinct is actually to dive into these crises, but then I actually choose my sources really well also, right? So I think it's a matter of time. I'm also trying out a new flow that's combining AI with mind mapping. So specifically GPT-4, I'm actually seeing if I can have it essentially summarize some of the sources that I'm looking into mind map form, and then I can connect the dots. So that's a new flow that I'm going to be trying out.
Oh, so you use AI for the cold start, and then
that's the theory. That is the hypothetical, because all these technologies are so new that, I'm still essentially figuring out, just like everybody else. I think if you talk to marketers, they're trying to go, hey, can we make make websites and copywriting and stuff. As a mind mapper, it's like, okay, well, how can we distill information faster, essentially, right? So we can keep up with the times as well.
Well, before we jump into like all the mind mapping goodness and turning chaos into structure, can you just take us back to the start? Just everyone knows your superpower is turning chaos into order. You're the mind mapping expert on YouTube, but can you just tell us like where did it all start? Like where did you grow up? When you work, you have a childhood dream.
Oh man, I had many childhood dreams. Well, so I was actually born in Shanghai, basically as an immigrant kid coming to the Bay Area when I was 7 years old. It was pretty gnarly. I mean, I came here in 1995, right? So I still remember how China was as a developing country. Like if you go to Shanghai now, it's like freaking metropolis. It's like the city of the future, like freaking literally like Blade Runner in good ways and bad. But I would say that back then you still had like people living on rivers in fishing boats and stuff, right? That was basically the China that I grew up in. And then coming to the US in the suburbs, basically a city kid coming to like Milpitas in Bay Area, it was like a world of change. I barely knew any English and everything. So it was a huge adaptation period for me. One thing led to another, essentially. I grew up in the Bay Area. I went to school in Berkeley. Afterwards, I went to Deloitte as a management consultant, but got bored of that after just 1 year. because I realized, first of all, I actually really crave to be part of a team, right?
Hmm.
And as a consultant, you're always an advisor looking in rather than being part of like the operations of actually making something happen. The other thing was that, I took a look at the ladder, right? The so-called corporate ladder of consulting. And I looked at my managers, senior managers, principals, and partners. And I quickly decided that this wasn't really the route that I wanted to take. It was kind of fortunate in that, right? Like it's very transparent what kind of roles and stuff like that they play. So I started looking for other opportunities. And this is when I jumped into my first startup, actually at a solar startup, not software per se. And that was pretty crazy. And long story short, I was actually laid off within 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
And
Solar was crazy back then, the hype.
solar was hype. This was Solar V1. This was before like SunPower, Tesla, all the Elon Musk's initiatives came up. And this was my first taste of screwing up from a market analysis standpoint, not doing enough due diligence or DD, right? And essentially, long story short, the market was tanking because China started dumping a lot of cheap solar into the market. And then we started laying off a lot of people. All the execs started leaving. But being a naive college kid, I was like, oh, I just keep on going. You don't really expect to be laid off like in your second job coming out of college. But lo and behold, my VP was just like, hey, it's not going to work. And I did the whole walk of shame down the aisles and just sat in my car for like 15 minutes laughing, going like, whoa, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So that basically led to a whole 8-month thing of going unemployment, dealing with that, and then teaching me essentially a lot of resilience. And applied to almost 100 jobs before getting into Google. So this is when I actually landed my dream job. Actually, funny enough, like I always tell people that you never know when adversity will throw you something, but then you can actually turn it, and also life chance really can land you in the spot that you've always wanted to be. And then from Google, I eventually transitioned over to Niantic Labs as the 30th employees there. Literally, it was such a small team back then, right? Now they're like, I think like 1,000 people or something. It's nuts with Pokemon Go. So I was part of the user operations team for Ingress, which is the precursor to Pokemon Go. We figured out all the little kinks and stuff like that before shipping it mainstream. But right before Pokemon Go actually launched, I decided to jump ship again and go to London for my MBA at the London Business School. Mainly because I felt that if I remain in the Valley for any longer, this place is a bit of a black hole, right? It will suck in talent and it will keep you here. So, looking at my coworkers, they got married with their coworkers. They sent their kids to Google preschool. And I was like, that's nice and all, but I feel like I'm still young and there's still a lot of stuff to learn. So that's when I decided to kind of like jump ship across the Atlantic. But yeah.
Okay, so you were in London, and this is after being at Google, after being at Niantic Labs. So what was the process like getting into startups, and then eventually, why did you start the Mind Mapping Nation? Like, can you take us through that journey?
No, for sure, man. Like, I would say that London was such an eye opener for me. It was like the first time in which I was in a new place. And when you're in a new location, you actually have an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Suddenly, nobody knows who you are, right? And also, London back then, in 2014, when I landed, was probably around like maybe 10 years behind the Valley in terms of tech development. So it was almost entering into an emerging market for tech. And here I was with this crazy experience, essentially from Google and Niantic going in there. So rather than actually, getting stuck or being pulled into the bubble that was the MBA, like every business school is a bubble, especially the first year, right? I actually started venturing into the London startup ecosystem and all the meetups like in the second month. Right. I didn't know anybody, but I started getting to know people, getting to know the organizers, starting setting up events myself as well. And, by the end of year one, I was already connecting essentially the ecosystem together, as well as connecting the startup and tech community with London Business School. So that was actually like probably some of the most fun times actually so far. And I feel like, you don't really get a lot of opportunities for that, right? And that's when I really dove into venture capital, as well as startups. And I had this choice, interesting enough, between VC or being a head of product for this like basically seed stage startup. And back then, I actually had a bit of a chip on my shoulder coming from the Valley, right? Because essentially, ideas people are a bit of a dime a dozen, and everybody worships product managers. So here I was with this, like, I mean, two great options, right? But then I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to go into product. Let's try that.
Yeah,
So I entered
yeah.
in
Everyone
that.
wants to be a
Yeah.
PM in the Valley. Yeah.
No, exactly, man. So that's basically what I did. And I learned a ton. When you're part of just like a 14-person startup as a PM, you're also like the designer, you're the engineering co-manager of sorts as well. And that's when you really run fast. You break a lot of things. You get in a lot of, personal conflict with the team as well. And eventually that was ultimately kind of what got me to leave that particular company, which was the difference in terms of, I would say, product philosophy between me and the founder, right? And I decided to take my first sabbatical, and that was literally, I think it was around like 6 months or so, where I had no plans. I was just learning. I read a lot of Ben Thompson. I literally absorbed the strategy mindset. That was actually such a learning period, I would say. And then I was facing, and towards the end, I actually had multiple choices. I had gotten what's called a tier 1 exceptional talent visa to work in the UK, basically like, no strings attached for up to 5 years, like a citizen, right? And it's
So you were like
huge
the
privilege.
tech, the James Bond of tech, basically.
Oh man, it was a good place to be, I would say, So I could either remain in the UK to, look for opportunities in tech or VC. I could return to the United States. And I also had another offer to basically co-found a AI accelerator in Beijing, in China, right? So it was such a crazy different, choices. But I ultimately returned back here for my family because my parents are aging and stuff, and I want to be a little bit closer to them. And I started talking to my VC friends in the Valley, because when you're, the Silicon Valley and tech world changes so quickly within 3 years. Like, entire paradigm shifts happened during that time.
Yeah.
And then everybody was somewhere else now. And VCs are great connectors. Their whole job is like networking and stuff. And I ended up getting introduced to Sturfy, which is an augmented reality computer vision startup. And with all startup founders, they try to basically make you an advisor, but really it's a recruiting tactic. And before I knew, I was going through interviews with the whole team. I was literally negotiating my offer letter as I was going back to London to go pick up my tier 1 visa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So they recruited you hard. Nice.
Yeah, no, it was really cool. And what got me was that they actually had the shittiest office I have ever seen for a startup. But to me, that was actually a good sign that they were not misusing their funds.
Yep.
That they were actually had a scrappy spirit. If they actually had like a whole pool, like pool tables or like all these perks and shit like that, I don't think I would have actually written in. So
yeah, I did when I was in back at DCM. We visited a startup, and we walked in, and then they had all these Aeron chairs.
Oh geez,
Max on the tables, and then I looked at the finances. I was like, oh, the CEO is paying himself like a lot of money as a seed Series A startup. I was like, bad sign. So that's good. That's Sturfy. Yeah, that's cool that you picked up on that, and they're like lean.
Very, very lean, exactly. And that opportunity, I'm very thankful for it, because they actually took me all over the world. It's funny because I was already resigned to my fate in the United States, and then we had tons of demand for our software from Japan, China, Korea. So I was constantly, Dubai. I was basically constantly traveling, and that was extremely good exposure. Actually, I would say London kind of gave me the first international leg, and it prepped me for what Sturfy was going to bring me to, which is basically closing deals from around the world.
So you did, because I remember that's actually how we met. Like when I was in VC, and then I was looking into augmented reality. So I met you guys, and then I remember seeing you at meetups, at like augmented reality meetups, and like you're like the best dressed guy at all these meetups. Well,
yeah, well, that's not hard to beat, Peter, because everybody in the Valley just wears hackathon shirts. And
yeah, exactly.
And
my best dress, I remember I was like, you had khakis on. I was like, okay, he's definitely the best dressed guy here. He doesn't have
Well, now being
jeans.
a creator, now being creators, I think we have even more liberty to dress however we want to. So,
Yeah. Well,
mhm,
so you were at Sturfy and you're traveling around the world,
mhm,
Asia, like Europe, um, all around doing these multi-million dollar BD deals so people can use your computer vision technology, that
mhm.
the AI infrastructure. What can you just take us through? So from there, what led you to becoming a creator and starting all this mind mapping, like sharing your mind mapping knowledge?
Yeah, man. I got to back up a little bit actually. So mind mapping itself has been my go-to tool for the last like 13 years since college, actually, And it wasn't I started really using it extensively during work, starting especially with Google. Because suddenly, I was part of the strategy team on Google Offers. We literally launched Google Offers and Google Wallet, and seeing all these like legit people essentially using this tool to really crack like some of the most complex go-to-market problems out there was quite an eye opener and actually closed a lot of feedback loops. It was actually very validating as well. So I would say it's been the consistent tool for me for the past, like, throughout my entire career. And I've jumped like 7 different companies before. Right.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't really start sharing it. I mean, I always shared mind maps like internally with my team and stuff like that as a way to strategize, to communicate, to build products and all that. But it wasn't until March 2020 when the pandemic first hit and the world started shutting down, right? And chaos was at its height. Like we think that we're going through chaotic times, but put yourself back in March 2020. Like
Yeah.
this was like freaking 28 days. It's like it's like zombie apocalypse level. Everything shut down. Insanity, right? Uncertainty was at its height. And so here I was sitting on a tool that could untangle chaos and alleviate the suffering from uncertainty and chaos. So I actually felt, I guess I felt compelled to turn my little photography camera around and direct it towards me and start filming a couple of tutorials about what is mind mapping, how to use it for, basically I did a couple of COVID analysis, threat analysis and stuff like that. And the funny thing is that there's a timing, right? And I think it just met the market or the user base or whatever it is, like
Mhm.
people at the end of the day. People really needed that tool at the time. And long story short, it started picking up. Funny enough, I was actually taking a sabbatical. At the time I didn't know, but it was going to be an 8-month sabbatical from content creation. That was when all my videos started really picking up, and I started getting like these daily emails going like, "Oh, so and so subscribed." It just kept on going, right? And I was like, okay. And then after like 6 months, 8 months or whatever, I checked back and on my numbers, and I was like, holy crap, like, 7,000 people like subscribe to this. How is this reaching like 200,000 people? Like it's kind of insane.
So with this, so you're on the sabbatical. Yeah. So you came back and you found that you were mind mapping out this chaotic COVID pandemic that was affecting the whole world. You brought a little more structure to everybody, and then you found that it was resonating with the audience. There's like 7,000 people after a year, and I remember seeing your 1,000 subscriber video. You're like, hey guys, I haven't been around for a while, and I think most creators they grind, like we make videos to get to it, but for you,
Yeah.
you just hit a nerve. Um,
Yeah.
so what can you just take us through, like you're in your 8 month sabbatical, you're reflecting over, being in startups is like a zany journey, roller coaster ride. And now
Mhm.
you've created some content. And was that mainly more for just, did you have that attitude of service already? Or was it more just fun or like self-expression? Or was it really, you're just trying to help out because COVID was
Yeah.
affecting everyone?
I was honestly, I was just trying to help out. I was actually really inspired by, Tomas Ponyo. I don't remember actually. He wrote a series of Medium posts that really went viral during COVID, and he literally he was breaking down the statistics, and then really encouraging governments to do more essentially like lockdowns as well as like mitigation tactics and stuff like that. This was just like an ordinary dude who wrote like different pieces, and he's like a he's not even a statistician. He was literally just like a marketer who knew his way around data, right? And he was really like, you know, making an impact on essentially the efforts to try to mitigate, you know, try to like flatten the curve, if you remember that term, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you know, there's like, you know, that's a power of the individual with a certain skill set, with a certain lens, to be able to see the world and share that view with other people to really make an impact, right? So I think and that's actually what inspired me to do the whole COVID economics analysis, right? It was just like, you know, and service has always been like a pretty huge part of my life ever since I turned 30. And it's interesting, like when I turned 30, before in the tech world, like, you know, a lot of people want to be 30 on 30 and all that stuff. Like I held like the same ambitions, right? In some ways, when you hit that number of 30 and you're surrounded by all these youngins, because the Valley is kind of like a young person's game of sorts.
Yeah, the teal fellow that has like weird no social skills but is a genius. It's like so weird. But it's interesting.
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, like, everybody ages in the Valley, right? So part of aging gracefully is actually like figuring out how to actually shift your sources of meaning across different periods of life. And for someone as ambitious as I was back then, I still am, but in different ways. It was almost kind of like, you know, I had to shift my frame of mind of the world in order to go, okay, rather than focusing on myself, can I actually focus, you know, my efforts outwards to actually help people, right? So it's almost kind of like a way to mitigate my big ego at the time. So I actually adopted, you know, service as the verb for myself. And this is actually a framework that I use to describe people, which is like, what is your verb, right? Because it's easy to describe yourself in like 10, 100 different adjectives. However, actions always speak louder than words. So I ask my closest friends, if you could describe yourself in one verb, what would it be? Right? If you could, it's like distilling down to the bare essence of who you are, not what you say you are, but what you do. So for me, I decided to adopt to serve as my verb. And for the past, like, you know, 7 years, I've been writing on that particular definition. So yeah, everything kind of aligned, I think.
I love that because, well, back when I was in LA as a songwriter, I had this identity crisis of being a venture capitalist, but now I was in LA and playing open mics, and it took me a long time to call myself a songwriter. And then when I started calling myself a songwriter, I couldn't write songs because of the label and the identity, right? And all this, my identity was tied up to, and my self-worth was tied up to that label.
Yes.
And I actually thought of that like something similar. I was like, why don't I just be a verb? Why don't I just write? I write. When people ask me what I do at a party, I don't say I'm a songwriter. Like I'd say I write songs. And it changed a lot because then I actually started writing instead of just going around saying, oh, I used to be a VC. Oh, I'm a songwriter. It's like, I write songs or I make videos. And like, so I love how you're talking about, I serve people. And so you had that for 7 years. Like, but I find that for someone that, you know, if you're like number one at LBS in an MBA program, like how do you even, and I know I was on, I personally for me, I've been on, and I'm still kind of on it sometimes, like that hedonic treadmill of ego, get all the external validation. Like, especially with MBAs, right? Like when I was in banking at like Goldman, we were all feeding off of that. Like, at least I know I was. How did you even think of service? Because that is so hard to minimize our egos and then focus outwardly or like focus on other people.
That's such a great question, Peter. And you know, I ranked number one in LBS, not for grades. I actually won the Bain Impact Award, which is given to the one student out of the year who had the most impact on the school, right? So that actually is an award for service. So that actually speaks volumes. And you know, I did it actually because I organized so many different things, including the London Business School hackathon. I actually started it, and this was, you know, literally like a 3-day event, connecting the London startup ecosystem to the school, which was a standalone business school without any, you know, engineering, design, or anything like that. You know, like it's not a college per se. So they badly needed it, right? So I saw a need and I fulfilled it, right? Pulled together a team of 12 other students, banged out all my contacts and then brought everybody together. In fact, that was actually how I got my internship and eventual offer from Boulderton Capital, which is one of the top 3 VCs in Europe. And all of that is through service, right?
Mm.
And in the MBA, as you know, it's just like in the Goldman environment, it's a Shark Tank. Everybody is trying to take. If you go to any networking event, you're going to get like one IB guy, professional, surrounded by like 10 other students. It's kind of crazy. And I never felt home there. I'm an introvert too, right? So I figured out pretty early on that, my way of connecting with people and making an impact is actually my advantage, my competitive advantage, right? Which is actually when you set up events, the attention's already on you and you get to know people in a more genuine, more relaxed way rather than trying to like push and take. So in that respect, it really is actually like, in the words of Dalai Lama, is selfish wise.
By focusing on others, ultimately your cup is filled versus always trying to
Yeah.
take first.
And it's so much more
Mm.
fulfilling, honestly. Like, there's a different feeling than trying to take and seeing the world as a zero-sum game. Like, there's so much more to be had if we just help each other out. I
Well,
mean, it sounds, yeah, go
Mhm.
on.
How did you get into that mindset though? Because like a story from one of my friends that went to like Harvard Business School. She was talking about how everyone talked about each other's social cap, like instead of market
Mm,
capitalization, like the value of a
mhm,
company, it's the value of a person. They're like social cap. I was like, oh my
right.
gosh, it's going up and down. Like I think, especially coming from the business world, like in tech, how did you actually make that shift though? Because I'm personally trying to do that myself. Like instead of
Mhm.
validating myself so much, I'm trying to validate others. But
Yeah.
I find it to be hard. It's not.
It's,
So I'm curious. Like, how did you do it? It seems like it
yeah.
happened pretty quickly or suddenly.
I would say, I always say that in order to grow in anything, including mindsets, you need to close feedback loops. It's all about closing feedback loops, right? And not only you have to have positive feedback loops close. So I started closing my feedback loops at a very young age. So I started leading teams when I was in like high school, if not middle school. So from a very young age, I was already, seeing the opportunities to lead people as well as, contributing to a community. And that has always yielded better results than me taking from the community. So when you actually close enough feedback loops, it doesn't have to be big. I think when you're first starting out, it's almost kind of like, don't put your job on the line to do that, right? That's too big of a jump for most people. I feel like when you're in the MBA, the stakes are so high. Think about it. You paid like $200,000 in tuition. Opportunity cost is $200,000 from like your job lost, like for 2 years not working minimum. So ultimately your opportunity cost, your total cost is like $400,000 for MBA. So you got a scarcity mindset. You're trying to recoup that, right?
Yep.
However, that's almost like the stakes are so high that's difficult to actually put like an abundance mindset as well as to have a giving and contributing mindset, essentially. So I would say, like, if you're already in that environment, don't try to go from level 0 to 100 right away. Start giving in smaller ways, right? Like start volunteering, start even just like, picking up trash nearby or helping somebody open up the door or something like that, start small, close small feedback loops and start like, building up. And let's say it's in your job and you're so competitive in your job because your environment dictates it. So there's a bit of a fire truck outside. I'm in the middle of the
It's good.
city.
Keep the ambience.
Yeah, dude.
It's
I know it's real.
I like that. I
I
like that one video where you zoom in on the horn.
Yeah, I know. And I'm such an introvert. So it's just like, heightened stimulation is like lose my train of thought. I would say like if you're in your job that's competitive and stuff, you don't want to necessarily do that there because the culture of the company also matters, it dictates and stuff like that,
Mhm.
right? But you can start closing feedback loops, let's say outside of it. For example, when I was in Google, there was definitely scarcity within the company, especially if you're trying to go for like, really sexy teams and stuff like that. However, I started finding more areas of abundance, let's say in volunteering for tech meetups, right? Stuff that is outside of my immediate job or competitive realm, to start exercising that giving attitude and mindset, right? So I would say close feedback loops, but also note where you close them.
And just for the audience out there, because I know in Silicon Valley, feedback loops closing them is a pretty common term. But
Yes.
can you explain what you mean by
Yes.
closing feedback loops? Like what would be the hypothesis and the thing you're testing and the conclusion you would look at? Like if
Oh
you
yeah.
wanted to test out, is service a direction I want to go in?
Oh, I'm gonna give you a very simple example. It's like training a dog. It's positive reinforcement, right? Like, let's say you get a puppy. The way you train a puppy is literally, if you want to do potty training, is that, every time he like takes a crap on the grass, you give him a treat, right? That's positive reinforcement. So that is closing a feedback loop. So what I mean by that is that you start a feedback loop by, starting like a particular action with some kind of goal in mind. And like, in the dog example, it's literally you want the right potty training, right? And then when that closes, you get a reward. So that positive reinforcement is really, really important. And I think for us, it's like the same way. If we want to be more giving, for example, let's say that's the objective of things, right? Because we know that giving can actually lead to better outcomes in the future. However, it's very difficult to do when you haven't done that for most of your life, or in a work environment that doesn't give you that opportunity to do so. Therefore, you have to look for opportunities where you can give yourself that positive reinforcement. So closing feedback loops, all it is reinforcing behavior.
Got it. Testing out hypothesis and reinforcing the behavior. Okay, cool. So closing feedback loops led you to focus more on service. And so what was ultimately what kicked you off the ledge to be like, all right, I'm just going to do YouTube full time. I'm not going to go back to the startup world, which is super comfortable. All your friends are doing it. Like how did you? That's a super hard path to carve out. Like
100%. I mean, there's two factors to this. The first one is that, it felt right. I was doing it. I mean, I made the jump after I think 1.5 years of being on YouTube, which is a pretty long time, almost 2 years. It got to, it wasn't even the numbers. It wasn't even reaching, let's say like 10,000 subscribers or something like that. There was no number in my head, right? For me, it was actually about what felt right. And it got to a point where what I was doing during my day job and my tech job felt like a distraction from what I really wanted to do, which was content creation, making stuff that can help people, right? No offense to all, my former startup or any companies out there, is I was also kind of tired of prostituting my mind to another entity. It was almost kind of like, if you know Nassim Taleb, the author of Anti-Fragile,
Black Swan,
he is Black Swan, right? And he's kind of what I would consider like a free intellectual. And he loves it that way. And I know the joy of being able to control my own thinking, because my brain is actually one of my most valuable resources. I know that now because these days I do a lot of coaching, consulting, and all that, right? So I know how valuable that it is. So I rather use that for my own volition rather than doing it for another, like a company or something. So I think that was actually like the feel of it. And also for me, like I've done so many jumps in the past. Before Sturfy, it was just like I've done like consulting, sales, analysis, strategy, user operations, product management, VC, business development. This was just another phase for me. And I had carved out, actually, I did a whole video on this, I think which you watched, which is mind mapping my decision to make the jump, right? And I mapped out all the factors. And a lot of it has to do with transparency of all the factors in front of you. Because I think for a lot of people, making the jump is so scary because it's like, you have like, what about costs? What about social, judgment? What about insurance? All this stuff, right? I mapped all this stuff out. Again, this is about chaos. This is about untangling chaos, going from chaos to order. So what I did was I mapped everything out. I put a number or a dollar sign around every single expense, including insurance, right? Insurance and benefits is something that for Americans at least is a huge deal. It's like what ties a lot of people to the company. But then I discovered that, hey, it's only going to cost around $500 for somebody like me to get like health insurance. That suddenly transformed from like a, nebulous, like, kind of like a, something that I couldn't put my finger on to suddenly a concrete thing that can mitigate, right? It became a counting number. So I think because of all these factors, I wasn't really afraid to go into it. And I carved out like $40,000 for me to actually essentially invest in myself like a VC. I literally took on the VC hat as like, okay, Sheng, you're both the investor and the founder, and here's 40K, and you're in San Francisco, which is super expensive, and this is going to provide you with a year of runway, right? Runway, as you know, for those who are not familiar, is dependent on burn rate. Burn rate is how much money you're burning every single month. It's basically revenue, or basically your funds minus your expenses, and on a monthly basis. So I calculated how many months it would take for me to run out of money. That was my runway, and it was like 12 months. So I was like, okay, let's run with this and see how quickly and how far we can go. And I was willing to do that.
Got it. So about a year and a half before, you had started your YouTube channel while working at your startup, just to help people, and then you took a sabbatical. You came back. You had how many subscribers did you have? Like when you decided to go full time? Like you said, around 10K.
It was around 10K. Yeah.
Okay, and then you quantify the risk and for the benefit, the gain of serving people, of using your own mind for things you found meaningful in your life that are aligned to your values. That outweighed all the risks, although there were many, but you quantify them. And so it was a net positive. You went for it. Well, can you tell us, like, how did you hone in on mind mapping as your, say, niche? Because like, was it because there was an audience demand? It's your strength. It's what you're into. Like what led you to that?
Dude, I ran in circles around mind mapping. I was trying to avoid it at some point, because I didn't want to be just known as a mind mapping guy. I think Tim Ferriss for the longest time, and for a while, he also didn't want to be just a 4-hour work week guy, right? Like he wanted to, and became a podcaster and book author and stuff like that. I think as human beings, we don't like to be labeled as any particular thing. We were just talking about this, right? Which is like, you're not just a musician, you're a songwriter. You write songs, but that doesn't necessarily mean all of Peter Su. So just like how mind mapping, it is not all of Sheng Huang. So in that respect, I was actually like, I experimented with a lot of different kind of like, avenues and stuff like that. But, and I even launched a website called silverandsteel.org. And that was like the precursor to Mind Map Nation, right? And that was actually much more aligned to my philosophy, which was finding that balance between, I guess, like technology or power and wisdom, really, in our lives, right? Because coming from the Valley, I saw just how much people were so over-indexed on the intellect, as well as quote unquote power in the ability to essentially like technology and science and all that. But we were sorely lacking in wisdom, emotional, like understanding and all that. And it caused me a lot of pain. So I wanted to actually address that for other people. However, the internet is also a harsh place where if you don't have a soundbite of 5 seconds, people don't really they get confused, and then that's all, right? The internet does not give much room for a multifaceted being to exist, unfortunately. So the numbers definitely reflected that. So I kind of ran in circles. It wasn't until February of last year, which is 2022 as of this recording, that I went on a 10-day meditation retreat, Vipassana, in Joshua Tree, which Peter, you went to as well.
Oh, J Tree, nice.
J Tree, yeah, no, for sure. So,
dude, me and you are actually, I think both. Like one of my best videos is my Vipassana video, and it's like me and you are like that. I was like, I was like, dude, no wonder we get along.
100%.
So you're in J Tree.
Yeah, man. This was on like day 9. It's a 10-day. It's like day 9 of 10, and I was sitting literally, cross-legged for like 8 hours, whatever. And suddenly an epiphany hit that I could use mind mapping as the vector to reach people, as an avenue to reach people, right? Because all mind mapping is, I think, in terms of like, first and second order degrees, essentially. And all that is, what does something lead to? And I realized that mind mapping actually led for me to better connective thinking, better associative thinking, and connecting the dots so that I can reach new insights. And also provided me with important critical thinking skills. So the act of mind mapping is actually like going to a mental gym that exercises your critical thinking abilities so you can make better sense of the world. It's not even about the mind mapping. It's actually about you being a human being able to make sense of the world for yourself rather than being spoon fed information in today's digital age. When that epiphany hit, and I was like, holy crap, not only am I already getting traction on mind mapping because people are using mind mapping for like organized project management, business strategy, and all that stuff like that, but I can use it as almost like a Trojan horse to teach important meta lessons so that we can become more fulfilled human beings and also just like, better critical thinkers in today's world. And this is when I was like, crap, this is a mission that I can stand behind, right? In the words of Nassim Taleb, it's it's breaking down the silos of thought by connecting the dots, right? So, anyways, that's basically when I was like, all right, let's focus on mind maps. And then this is when the whole Mind Map Nation, community came together. And it all started in, again, like a little mind map, and I built it out into this like, this over 100-person community now.
Nice. So mind mapping, it sounds like if I hear you correctly, it was really stemming from you being that verb service. You want to find the best way to serve people. And even though you didn't want to be pigeonholed into mind mapping, you found you were getting a lot of people wanted it. There's traction and you so it's really service. It's really an act of service. It's based off your experience and strengths and interests, but driven by that's what can help. That's your kind of gift to the world.
It is. And you know what? And that's actually my art as well. You know what I mean? Like, I think every artist ultimately wants not just self-expression, but actually trying to make something that is beyond themselves, outside themselves. So, I don't want to sound like super altruistic. It's also kind of selfish too, because I derive a lot of meaning from it also, right? It's meaningful for me. It gives me purpose. And that's literally why I quit my job, because that part did not feel as fulfilling. So, it's a full circle, I think.
Yeah. I love hearing your story because I feel like a lot of your story resonates because when I was at my startup, I also enjoyed like the business aspect, like what you call steal, right? Like going 0 to 1 at a seed stage startup in SF,
Totally.
like getting customers, getting the ARR, learning how to do sales,
get the funding,
manage a team. Yeah, getting the funding.
Yeah, dude.
But I actually really enjoy that part. Like there's a part of me that loves that, but then the part of me that's the musician, like I wasn't connecting to people on an emotional level. I didn't feel like I was actually helping people personally.
That's right.
Like we were helping them make more money as property owners, but I wasn't helping them like personally. And so to hear you talk about how you made that like your jump and it's all in service. Like I find that story, I find it to be so rare and yeah, it's really cool to hear that. So can you just take us through like, can we do a live mind map so that people that are watching, if you're listening on the podcast, you'll have to tune in to see this. But yeah, could you do a live demo of say a question I've had that a lot of creators have, which is like, how can I clarify my niche?
Ah, got it. Very, very nice. Let me share my screen really quick.
Okay,
are you able to see? Cool.
Okay,
all right. This is
okay. First, we're sharing the screen mind map.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So I'm using I actually use two ways of doing mind maps. I either hand draw them like this on Notability or my notebook, or I use a specialized mind mapping app like iThoughtsX or XMind or whatever it is. This is iThoughtsX, right? So we're going to start a brand new one right here just for Peter. Okay, cool. And the beginning of any mind map is literally starts with a central idea. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up because you get a blank page like syndrome. You get like, holy crap, you're staring at a blank page just like a writer. It's like, what do I do? I usually like to start with the question, right? Because mind mapping is really trying to answer questions in a non-linear open way. So in this respect, that's why it's called central idea. Well, I like to say central question. So what is the question that we are trying to answer? What is our niche, right? What's my niche? What's my niche? It starts with this, and then the next thing is I use like different templates in my head, mental models and stuff like that. But the first question I actually say is I like to ask why, who, how, Actually, even before how is what, when, and so the set of questions then kind of gives us a bit of a kind of starting point, right?
Mhm.
So what's my niche? Well, I actually like to ask, like, what is it? Why do you want to be on YouTube, for example? Right? Maybe we'll use you, Peter.
Yeah, I'd say my why is I want to do things that I love, like that I enjoy, and that I also want to help people. And I think more specifically, help people probably feel better about themselves or on some emotional level.
Feel better. Yep, and
And I
specifically,
also
actually,
want
emotional
time to do things that I find um, are meaningful.
time ownership,
Mhm.
meaningful.
And I also want to, like what you've mentioned in a video, like agency or autonomy. Like I want to,
Exactly.
yeah.
Agency. Yep. Yep. And then, okay, yeah. So why? Those are all great reasons. Who do you think would benefit? I guess, like, also another way of actually saying is why do you think you are the right person?
Oh, why my I think it's been because I'm like a multi-potential like how you are.
Mhm.
And it's taken me time to figure out uh because there's so many ways I could go. Like there's so many audiences I could make
It's a
content
journey.
for. But
Yeah,
why am
that's
I the
right.
right person? I think what makes
Mhm.
me unique is that
Mhm.
you know, I'm a I was so into that steel world.
Yeah,
I went to Berkeley. I was a Goldman Sachs TMT investment banker. I was a venture capitalist at like a $2 billion fund. But
that's right.
I was
Yep. Yep.
also a musician busking for tips on Santa Monica Pier and eating Subway for like 5 days a week for about a year and a half to um, make
That's
my
right.
album and record in Prince's studio and do a tour around like the US. And like
Exactly.
I drove Ubers so I could raise money for my tour. Um,
Yep.
so I think having coming from both of those worlds, there's a unique intersection there, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it is. I think if my hunch is it's something to do with like people like you and me and like the people that are watching, like creators, people that are.
Mhm.
I find it so rare to meet people that are analytical as well as like creative and in tune with their feelings. Like so, I think
That's
for
right.
me, people like you that are analytical but also
Both.
feelers, like
Yes.
combining those worlds. I feel like I'm kind of that intersection, and hopefully, I can help people like that. But I don't know how many
That's
people there
right.
are like that though.
Oh, no, for sure. I think, that's actually a really important thing, so which is a bridge, right? So I actually like to bold the stuff that resonates, and actually, I'm gonna change the format a little bit because this actually helps a lot from just like a formatting. Ooh, actually, no, let's stick with that. So, essentially, what resonated just now is a bridge, right? Basically combining, what I call steel, which is like our professional versus our personal experiences, our emotional intuition and wisdom, right? I think that is something that's, kind of lacking. So I guess my question then is, who is it that you're trying to reach? Who is it that is, suffering or has this pain? Because there's a saying in startup sales, which is you want to sell painkillers, not vitamins,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Who is feeling this pain?
Uh, I think the
And
person
what
I
is the
can most
pain? Hmm.
the pain is. I think the person that I can most help is like the 25, 26-year-old version of Peter, the guy that's in corporate that is actually creative as well and
Yep.
wants to find more meaning in life, and they want to be their true selves, and they want to themselves, they want to help people. But it's that person that's like kind of like a duck in like a world of frogs or something, or vice versa.
Yeah, that's right. Almost like a mutant, right?
Yeah, like a misfit, like the weird
Yeah.
misfits, like writing
Hmm.
like that guy.
Absolutely. No, for sure. Yep. So basically, I love how concrete that is, by the way, that 25-year-old version of you, right? Because honestly, as every creator, I think we start creating for people like ourselves. Again, because we know the pain so intimately. Okay. And that's the other great thing about mind mapping is that like we can always return to here if you have additional things you want to add. It's completely non-linear in that respect, right? If something comes up, it's like, oh, I remember something else. We'll put it where it belongs.
And Shay,
Okay. Yep.
can you say the software again? Rob's asking in the
Yeah, it's
chat.
called iThoughts X.
Okay, cool.
And really, there's so many other options. iThoughts X is just one of these ones that one of the few softwares that does not use subscription because everything is SaaS these days, right? Or software as a service. It is kind of hefty. It's like $50 for the license, but you don't have to pay a monthly fee of like I don't know, like $5 to $10. Anyways, well, I'll link some other software recommendations. Yep. Okay. So next question is, what is it? How, I guess this is kind of related to how as well, right? It's like almost kind of like what I mean by what is the deliverable that you think can help these people, right? Because now we have your why and why am I the right person? And we now have a target audience who is suffering this pain. How do you intend to do that? In what fashion, I guess?
I mean, I think videos is an easy one. Videos, newsletters, the podcast, like bringing on people that inspire me, that inspire other people, and then learning the tools they use to empower the people that need the tools.
Exactly. Yes. And would you say that the videos are more like from yourself versus podcasts is like from others, like the community?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Got it. Yep. And then what about newsletters?
Newsletters would be similar. It'd be like from me, but I might include clips from the podcast. But yeah, it's probably like more of my thoughts and experiences.
Okay. Yep. Got it. Newsletters. So I just drew an arrow over to from podcast and newsletter because it is kind of related. And that's the other cool thing about mind mapping is that when you feel like there's a connection or flow, you can actually draw those arrows. So it's actually more noticeable what that means. And actually, right now, it just occurred to me that I would draw an arrow from why am I the right person to the 25-year-old me. Oh gosh, come on. There we go. Mainly because this is a big connection, right? Most of the time, when we think about the audience, we don't really think about why am I the right person, but it has to be a fit. This is what in like startup speak is product market fit, right? Why is my product, which is in Creatorville, it's about you are the product. So why am I the right fit for this particular audience? I think, it's important to have a linkage. All right. So we got the what? Videos, newsletters, and podcasts. What I mean, the next question is how? So this could be, for example, platforms, right? Platforms, all that stuff like that. So what I like to do is I'll actually make a little copy of this, delete all of this so that it's almost kind of like a mirror, right? So how do you intend to deliver videos to people?
Like, how do I make the videos and stuff?
Let's talk about platform. So for example,
okay. So distribution, channels. Like YouTube.
Yep.
It'll be IG and TikTok. Yeah.
Yep, got it. Cool. And then newsletters, distribution channel. Could be
website. I have to figure that out. Probably MailChimp or something, or
website, MailChimp, landing page, right? Landing page. Yeah, the how is usually actually the operations. What I like to think about how is actually the operations of how you're going to actually deliver the what to the who, if that makes sense. Right. And podcast, I think what is this? StreamYard. Right. And then
Anchor,
Apple,
Anchor, StreamYard,
Anchor. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll go to Spotify, Apple, all those. Yeah.
Spotify. Yep. Cool. Awesome. And then when? What's the cadence in which there's actually two ways to think about when. It is essentially it's either the cadence in which you want to do things, as well as if you're starting from scratch. Let's say you're like a beginner, like let's say you haven't even started YouTube, or you haven't even bought a camera yet. It's just like, what's the game plan? What's the game plan, right? It's almost kind of like, what's the first week? What are you going to do during the first week? Are you going to scope out, like check out, let's say, do a whole audit of similar creators, right? Week 1, maybe week 2 is like getting a camera, mic, getting the equipment. And then maybe week 3 is actually like, launching, or basically, starting the channel or something like that, right?
Yep.
And then maybe within the same week, you'll record first video. And then 4 week is learn editing software, and then publish video, right? So this is game plan if you haven't started. Cadence is if you're a current creator, and let's say I'm launching like a podcast, which I intend to do next month, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how often am I, podcast? Once a week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's basically when. And then finally, metrics. It's basically like, what are your, key performance indicators? What are your metrics of success? How would you even, because there's a saying, which is, if you can't measure it, you can't really dictate the success. However, what I think about metrics is actually there are process metrics, and then there are outcome metrics.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Input,
so
mm-hmm.
When you're starting out, I would say don't focus too much on the outcome, because you have no freaking control. You don't even know what the market is. You don't know what the platform is capable of, the algorithms or anything like that. I would actually recommend, basically focusing on the process, right? So maybe this is actually like, relating it to Cadence. Process could be actually, let's say, posting once a week or something like that, right? So posting short video once a day, long video once a week, something like that.
Yep.
Outcome is like, reaching,
I don't know,
subs by this year, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So question for you is like, how do you determine the initial nodes? Because I feel like for the question of what's my niche, I know the why and who helps a lot, but then the what and how, I guess it does help, because I can then connect those to the who and why. But yeah, how do you come up with the nodes and know that they're the best way to break it down? So versus say like, oh, what's my niche? Okay, audience. Another way is like audience demand, my interests, my strengths. That could be like, how do you choose the framework?
You know what? It's interesting. There's 2 ways to mind map, right? You can either do it from a top down level, which is what I'm doing right now, which is using a framework and a structure. And a lot of my frameworks come from experience. It's interesting. Like if you think about like a kid, right? A kid learns not through frameworks, not from top down, but actually from the ground up. So the ground up way of mind mapping is literally just by mapping out all the different like elements that come to mind. And this is actually how we organically learn as well through life, right? So my frameworks, when I have these 6 questions, it's because I've launched products before. I know these are the 6 questions I need to ask before I launch any product, any project. So I have that kind of retrospective. However, if I'm starting out, if I didn't have this framework, I would literally start with, let's say, what's my niche? It would be far less organized. Maybe it's just like, oh, maybe it's people fed up with corporate, or desire to create, or someone like me. Okay, so if I start with this is already like, this is very organic, right? There's no questions that you're asking except for the first one. I think the most important question is actually the first question that you ask, essentially, in the mind map. Because after that, you can actually start answering that question, because all these are answers. And then the question, then you can actually phrase it like a question. I actually challenge people, which is, for every statement, reverse it into a question. Think about that, right? When you reverse a statement like this into a question, you're like, okay, someone like me? What does that mean? Right? Then you can start expanding. It's like, oh, 25-year-old me, right? Old me. And maybe it's like, I'm fed up with corporate, so I make a drawing right there or something like that. And then, maybe you phrase this as a question, which is, what does it mean to be fed up with corporate? Like, how do they feel? Right? Like, what does that mean? And then break down the emotions essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually a very ground up or organic way of mind mapping. And this is actually how I go about it when I don't have a structure about it. I literally will start answering it and then rephrase the statements into questions so I can do second order thinking.
And then do you do like a V2 of this mind map until it becomes more structured, or you just keep?
Yes, I do actually. For it's interesting, man. Like, I actually use multiple mind maps as a distillation process, right? The first map is pure chaos. It's literally just trying to get my thoughts down.
Got it.
But then I take one step back and I go like, okay, what are the patterns here, right? And you can probably see it with this. Actually, this is a crazy mind map where I'm actually literally mapping out my social anxieties and stuff. So it's just like, the signs of that, the contributors of it. Why does it matter? What's next and stuff. So from this map, what I would do is actually, I've mapped out, this is like pure chaos. This is like my first iteration of it, right? And then I stand back and I start annotating with a red ink and I start going like, okay, well, why does it matter? Well, because I want to live freely. And I want to be free from fear. And then taking in all of the different elements of this map that I've expanded on, I go like, I actually create a statement, which is, I do not want to live in fear. I want to be relaxed and grow into myself in any setting to experience everything this beautiful world has to offer. And I expand on that by saying, I want to feel alive and free and connect and express myself because it is what it means to be human. That's actually my ideal state. I couldn't have gotten to this without expanding out all the elements first.
Got it. So your first, if you're doing it, if you have a structure, you can go top down. If you don't, you can go bottoms up. You can do you can map it out as all chaos, kind of like what we're seeing here in the blue, but then you add like a layer. Your annotations is V2. It's your insights and takeaways, the connections. Okay.
Yes. And if it gets too crazy, I'll literally, if I wanted to say what's next, I can actually create another map that's only focused on what's next. And I can turn it into like a 2-week sprint, for example, like an action plan that has a timeline and specific actionable steps that I can take, right? That's what I mean by multi-step, multi-map distillation process.
Got it. So like, let's say even with the social anxiety one, this is the brainstorm, you've annotated and prioritized the most important elements. And then to transform it from brainstorming to execution, do you turn it into a Kanban board or?
I can do that. Yeah, no, exactly. Right. So literally, I can turn it into a Kanban board if I wanted to. I can also turn it into a 2-week sprint, which I map out as well. Let's see. Oh, not here. Anyways. But yeah, no, long story short, basically you can, once you actually map out the action steps, I can convert it into Notion in literally like actionable steps that I can take back and track over the next 2 weeks, for example.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for that. And then just tying the knot on the finding my niche. Is there anything else you would do with that top-down version?
The top-down version. Let me see. So let's expand this out fully, actually. Boom. You can tell that, this thing can get like pretty big pretty quickly. This is where annotations really come in. Why am I the right person? I would, the only
question I have from this patch is like, if I help the 25-year-old version of me, the corporate guy that wants it is creative, my fear is that there's not enough people like that. I don't know. I personally don't. You're like one of few people I know that was in the business world that's also creative. So how do I address that angle?
You know what? I would actually phrase that as a question, right? So essentially, under who, I would ask enough people, and I would go, the action here would be to, let's say, find out, right? And then you can go, okay, how would I find out, right? Is it market research? Ask people, ask people / friends, right? Because then you can actually turn this into like a 2-week sprint. Let's say like, tie this into your game plan. Let's say week 1 is to ask people, right? Or maybe week 1 is also to do market research. This is what I mean by mapping, right? If anything comes up, yep.
I love it. So you basically, if you have any questions, it's there, you visualize it, you have all your questions laid out, and then you can map out the action steps to close those loops.
That's exactly it. Because
I love
week 1
it.
actions,
This systematic way.
Very, very systematic. Yeah, week 1 is literally, this is what you can actually turn into like Notion Kanban cards.
Got it. Very cool. Well, all right. Well, Sheng, like thank you for that live demo. And I have so many questions for you. I feel like we could talk for hours. Let's just jump into like goal setting. I feel like
yes,
you are super, super productive and you've set goals. I know in your video, you've talked about SMART goals, like specific, measurable, actionable, like all those results, timeline. But what's your take on, a lot of people talk about input goals and output goals. Like when do you think those are appropriate? And especially for creators, you know how like Ali talks about input goals, make one video a week. Don't think about getting 1,000 subs or 10,000 subs. But then on the other side of things, startup land, it's like, hey, how do we grow from 1 million ARR to 3 million ARR in the next year? And then how do we go from 3 to 10? And how do we go from 10 to 30? And then you back solve. You bust out the Excel, you find the sales reps, you timeline out the product development to meet that goal. Like, yeah, you've been in both worlds. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, man. I would say from a creator's perspective, since that's our audience, I would say process goals, especially when you first start, is the most important, right? Because it all comes down to information and experience. The thing is, at this point, Ali has enough history as well as data and experience to actually set relevant and realistic, I would say, outcome goals, right? Versus process goals. So, output versus input, because he's been in the market for a long time, right? Whereas if you're starting out, you don't, like, for example, if I can actually now set outcome goals for my YouTube, because I've been on YouTube for 3 years and I've got, over 20,000 subscribers. I kind of know the numbers essentially, right? So I can actually set like pretty decent projections and stuff like that. That's when I think it's appropriate. But when you're first starting out, you have no idea. Like, for example, I'm starting out like on TikTok. I don't know what the algorithm is, like my only thing that I should focus on is creating better incremental, essentially, like videos every single day. That's kind of my take on it for a creator.
So if I heard you, it's input goals until you can predict, you have data to predict, until you have data to do accurate forecasts. Or
100%. Yeah, it's the same thing with startups, right? Like, I would say that every startup, like, this is why VCs, venture capitalists, don't take the numbers that seriously. It's just literally just to do a sanity check and also to see if the founders are thinking in the right way from a go-to-market. The numbers are just a reflection of the process. The process matters much more than the numbers because they don't know jack shit. Nobody knows.
Yep. And so, kind of going back into the silver world a little bit, the internal world. Can you take us through like what are your life values like, and how did you come up with this?
Man, wow, that is quite the question. It's interesting. I'm still coming up with them, right? I see my entire life as like try and error. Like that's definitely reflected in my career, where I've jumped around 7 times across different countries and roles and all that, and we learn essentially. I still make a lot of mistakes, right? I would say my values are shaped from both my mistakes as well as my successes, and I would say, like, some of my biggest ones in the last, let's say, 3 years has been vulnerability and trying to overcome this like perfectionism of sorts. if you look on my initial videos, they're all scripted. And it's because I was writing on this like professional polish that carried me throughout like my entire life, right? Like I was always expected to be perfect in a lot of ways. And for the longest time, and it's interesting, my definition of perfectionism really changed actually in the last, even the last 2 weeks. That shows you how quickly, you know, things can change, which is I was reading Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart,
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
where
love that.
yeah, man, there was a line that basically said that, you know, perfectionism is not about mastery for self-improvement, because healthy striving is about, you know, improving oneself incrementally. Perfectionism is actually about this question of what will others think of me. Ultimately, it is actually externally influenced essentially by somebody else's standard, right? And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because that explained a lot about my fear of vulnerability before, right? My current, still ongoing fear of judgment, both the craving of positive judgment and the aversion from negative judgment, right? And that's not good, because that's actually just double the 2x fear of judgment, really. And I think, you know, with that, it's like a learning process. These days, it's almost kind of like, okay, well, if perfection is an illusion and life is really short, then I might as well go do the things and really express myself to truest form, right? It causes like far less anxiety, and it's just like, but at the same time, we all know this, but it's another thing essentially to actually act on it, right? So I think values are the starting point, but in
Yep.
order to solidify them, we really need to actually have opportunities to practice them. And again, going back to closing the loop until it becomes like part of our real identities.
Nice. Yeah. So it's like applied values, not just aspirational. Well, what are your
Yeah.
priorities? Because you are so productive. Like you do these 2 week sprints. You built like this YouTube channel, the Mind Map Nation.
Mhm.
You're about to launch a podcast. Like you are getting stuff
Yeah.
done, man. Like how do you
Yeah.
prioritize like just your life in general? Because I think for creators, I know for me personally, like it's always a struggle with like focusing and being a good partner in my relationships, being a good friend, son,
Yes.
while building a business as a
Yeah.
solopreneur, while being
Yeah.
healthy, while having some type of spiritual practice. Like, how do you prioritize all that?
Man, I think it can be boiled down into one word, and that's intention. I think whenever I feel, so here's the thing with building so many things is that when you're in this operations mode and you're running your life on Kanban boards, 2 week sprints, down to 25-minute Pomodoros, like that's how intense I am when I'm in the building phase, right? That's why I'm able to like pull together so many things in like a single month. I built basically My Map Nation, the website, newsletter, the community, 7 launch videos essentially, right, in 3 months, and 2 ebooks. Um, yeah, I know exactly, right? However, what I found at the end of that, even 3 months after the launch, was that I was still stuck in this ops mode, what is I called, right? Ops mode has a place and time. However, sometimes it also gets in the way of intention. Sometimes I get like kind of burned out. I always wonder, is like, wow, what is the point of doing this? I feel a little bit empty, right? So these days, I actually trust my feelings more. So whenever I feel kind of like more burned out or almost like a lack of purpose of sorts and feel a little bit lost, I actually slow myself down. I stop tracking my Pomodoros. I stop running sprints, and I stop doing the things that actually made me successful in that building mode, and literally like take time off. I will have like no agenda days. Literally just like, because when you're in
Mhm.
ops mode, you start thinking in terms of opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is how you get disconnected from both what you do and other people, right?
Mm.
The way to reconnect is, funny enough, to let go of all these things that you're so plugged into in order to actually, let's say, mind map or journal. Sometimes I even put away these tools to just be, and then essentially try to figure out, wow, okay, well, you know, what is it that actually matters to me, right? Those are the times in which, like, you know, I start kind of like recovering who I was and then start going back on the path of sorts, not just in the building phase.
Got it. So it's like the whole what got you here won't the mindset that got you here won't be the mindset that gets you to where you need to be now. And listening to your feelings so that you can better prioritize what really actually matters. I love that, man. Well, how do you, for you, what's your thought on like, I think a lot of creators, especially people that are coming from the corporate world,
Mhm.
I struggle with this is like, what's better, like making money first and then doing what's fulfilling, or
Mm.
going for what's fulfilling and then figuring out the money piece, the stability piece as you go.
Oh man, it's that's interesting. Everybody's path is a little bit different, right? It really depends on your risk appetite. I think my risk appetite is actually higher than other people just because I came from the startup world and I just, jumped so much. But at the same time, I'm not professionally unsuccessful. So I was actually like, being in tech, you do have the privilege of having like, savings essentially, right? But it's interesting because savings itself is not going to get you to get off your ass, go create. Otherwise, there's so many tech people out there. Not all of them are creators for a reason. There has to be some other factor essentially that kicks you into gear. I would say, it also depends on your degree of dissatisfaction with what you're doing. Again, the reason why I made the full jump is because I was just so fed up with being distracted from what I really wanted to do. So there's a lot of different factors like your risk tolerance, how much you're fed up with your current state, how much savings you've got, as well as like how much you believe in your mission of sorts as well, right? How much badly
Mhm.
you want it. That's going to determine whether or not you're ready to make the jump. But if you're not ready to make the full time jump, then the part time is not that bad of a thing. I did it for like 2 years essentially, right? So you can 100% do it that way. And these days, honestly, it's easier than ever to create. It's kind of insane, man. Like with all these permissionless platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and stuff like that, we have like right now, I'm using my phone as the webcam, right? I don't even have a professional camera. All of my TikToks these days, I purposefully use my phone rather than my professional camera. Again, this is overcoming my perfectionism and all that, right? Um, Far less. And these days, you can just hire editors. Like you can hire an editor for a long YouTube, like video for like $100. So in that sense, if you're making a lot of money in tech, like even if you're laid off with severance, you can still afford that.
Yeah, it's you can test things out, you can just create. Kind of double clicking into that. Can you take us
Hmm.
through what is your workflow? I know we talked before,
Oh yeah.
you spent the last 2 months building a sustainable system, and
Yes.
being a systems builder is one of your superpowers. Like, can you take us through, yeah, like how you built the system, how it works?
Oh man.
Just
Absolutely.
high level. And by the way, how
Yeah,
are you
yeah,
doing on
yeah.
time? Because otherwise we could switch to more rapid fire.
No, no, no. Time is good actually. I'm
Okay.
good. I would say there's actually six steps in my workflow. And this is actually what I strategize out. I'm actually having a video come out that's going to go through my entire kind of flow. But at a high level, it's ideation, writing, filming, editing, publishing, and distribution, which can then actually be batched together into prep, make, and share. The batching is extremely, extremely important. And mainly because when you're doing all six steps, like, one at a time in piecemeal, you're wearing six different hats. These are like very, very different, like, roles for any like creator out there, Peter, which is like, you're like a company in one, right? And there's a reason why there's specialization. So the switching costs are immense when you're in this kind of mode. So by batching it, you already consolidate six steps into three: prep, make, and share, right? The prep is ideation and writing. I'm already in this like intellectual realm, because, as artists, what we're doing is literally putting in the work to turn like, abstract experiences and ideas or whatever it is into something concrete to share with other people. So if you're already in that mode, stay in that mode for as long as possible. And then there's film and editing, which is part of the make batch, right? So this is where like I'll just try to crank out, let's say, three or four videos at a time. If I'm filming my shorts, I'll do like, 14 shorts at a time, essentially. And then when that's done, I'm able to upload it to, let's say, or for myself to edit. And these days I actually hired like, my editors essentially, and I just batch give them that too. And then finally, there's share, which is publishing and distribution, right? Which is making the captions and timestamps and links and all that stuff like that, scheduling.
So how long does each bucket take you? Like the script writing, the filming, the editing?
Yeah, man. I mean, even within that, that is, I would say that the hardest part is the ideation and the writing at the moment. Sometimes it's the filming, but I've actually you've become better at these things as well, right? The ideation and writing is most difficult because I also have a newsletter. So the way I actually like do my entire like pipeline is that my so it comes from ideas. Ideas come from essentially like the ideation comes from My Map Nation these days because I have a community of 100 people who we meet up together for like, meetups and stuff like that. Another fire truck. Um, so I actually think about the fire moments, right? These are the highlights. These are the epiphanies that happen. And then epiphanies also happen during real life, right? Throughout our conversations and stuff. So I try to capture that. Um, these days, actually, I started using Logseek as of last week. What are you still there?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, yeah. So sorry. And then I basically convert that into a newsletter in writing, and then if something resonates from the newsletter, then I can turn it into a long form video. That long form video can then be turned into shorts, right? However, now I'm actually far more flexible. Sometimes I actually start with the shorts, and then I turn the shorts into a newsletter, and then the
To
newsletter
test.
can turn into a long.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
got it.
And
So
also
you
the
basically
stakes
have
are
this whole
lower.
ideation pipeline to basically see what's resonating, whether it's from questions from the MyMat Nation,
Mhm.
what resonates with your newsletter, what resonates on shorts. Then you turn those into a long video. Well, then how long does the actual writing the script take once you have the idea?
Well, the script is actually sometimes what's interesting. If I'm doing the shorts, that's why I actually start these days. I actually prefer starting with shorts because the stakes are so low, right? I sometimes don't even need to write a script. I can just make a mind map. Literally, when I talked about, I had a whole series about perfectionism. Literally 7 short, video series about that, right? I just mapped out the concepts. There's not even a scripting, and I basically just film 7 shorts, just like bang them out in like 20 minutes or something. And then once those are edited, I actually pull the transcript from Descript, and then I basically string them together into some kind of newsletter, which then if, once I publish that and stuff like that, that basically becomes the basis of my script for YouTube.
Yeah, got it. So you're becoming a repurposing master. So, and I know you're really good with working with an editor. I know that, we both took
Mhm.
P2AA, and you talked about like your takeaway was that Ollie's whole thing was like, just find an editor. And now you've become really good with working with
Yes.
editors. Any advice on how to
Oh
work
man.
with an editor? Because I think that's the part that P2IA didn't really teach as much.
No, man. Okay, so PTYA taught us how to hire an editor, right? Like how to
Yep.
vet them and stuff like that. But once you actually get somebody on board, well, first of all, the hiring process is extremely important. It's like the 80-20 rule. You want to get someone who's like 80% there. So I would say in the hiring process, definitely A/B test. I know it's going to sound expensive, but try to hire like, 2 to 3 editors in order to just like see the results and have them actually work on the same video, because I promise you that time, that investment will actually pay dividends down the line, because it's going to get you to that 80%, right? There's usually one editor that's going to be like miles ahead of everybody else. That's the one you want. So let's say you get that 80% there editor, and then basically it's an iteration process, right? Of how to get to that 90%. It's never going to be 100% because nothing's perfect. They're not you at the end of the day, right? So don't assume they're going to get to 100%. Just that's not realistic.
Plus
Um,
there's subjective parts too. Like what they choose is still good, even though it might not
exactly.
be what feels right for you. Yeah.
100%, right? So I would say, the most I've gotten is like probably 95%, which is 100% good enough. It's good enough. Just ship it. But that iteration process is through Frame.io, which, they upload the video. I basically comment, and I comment like crazy, by the way. I've worked with editors and teams of like studios and stuff like that, and they basically have told me that out of all their clients, I have commented, I'm like the most stringent, which is kind of crazy. I'm basically like the most critical, but with a smile, right? And I have left like 100 comments for like a 20-minute video before, right? That is
Mhm.
the amount of detail that I put into essentially the feedback. And it's for their own good. It really is, because the next iteration, let's say that's V1, the V2 is going to be like maybe 50, and then V3 is going to be like 20, and then we're done basically, right? But it's going to improve over time. it's not going to get there from the very first video. So I would give it like maybe 2-3 videos at least, and not get frustrated with the feedback process. Really lean into it.
Got it. So it's realize that the feedback, don't be shy, because it'll really help you build a long-term relationship, because their quality goes up. They also become, they know what your style is. It improves their editing, and it
Yes,
compounds, and over time.
it
And
really
then,
does.
well, okay. Okay. So how long do you spend reviewing videos these days, now that you've kind of you're on the same page with your editor now?
Yeah, man. It depends on what kind of video we're talking about. I make 2 types of videos. There's the pure talking head video where I'm sharing life experiences and lessons and stuff like that. And then there are tutorial videos. Tutorial videos are like almost like Loom videos, right? There's actually very minimal editing that needs to be done for that one. So I don't spend too much time checking up on those. It's a personal life lesson stuff, what I call like the silver videos versus steel videos, that I spent a lot because they're personal, right? And I use it's like so B-roll heavy. And any video that uses a ton of B-rolls, there is timing, there is selection, there is music.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it is complicated. So
sound design.
Yeah, sound design, right? Emotional weight, all of that, man. Like, so I would say, yeah, man, it really depends on what kind of video we're talking about. For the silver, for the emotional impact kind of videos, I could spend like, personally, if I were to edit it, maybe upwards of like 20 hours on that, right?
Yep.
It's kind of nuts. Yeah.
Well, but what if you're working with an editor? Is it now? It's like it takes you about an hour or 2 hours to review.
I would say if it's yeah. So I would say the first iteration might actually take like 2 hours for me to go through.
Yeah.
1 to 2 hours actually, right? Also because I'm extraordinarily detail orientated. And then the second iteration might take like 30 minutes or so, I would say. But if it's a tutorial video, usually it's like I'm done within like 1 hour the first iteration. The first iteration is always the longest because you're basically nitpicking, and it's just, it's not quite there.
It's good to hear, because I feel like I got a good cadence with my shorts editor. We went through that process, a lot of feedback initially, but now if I give him a short, like it's like there's barely any comments, and it's just
exactly.
I know what I'm getting. He knows what to do. But with long videos, it's been there's more variables. So it's good to hear you got that down.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I feel like Peter, a lot of your videos are also like pretty soulful, especially like you use so much B-rolls, and I think that's actually that's fantastic. It also increases the difficulty of it too.
Well, I'm
not making your editors live.
Oh, so that's the thing. I'm thinking I need to like, because I'll spend 30, 40 hours on a video and there's so much B-roll, but then it has like 200 views. I'm like, maybe I could have spent that time on the topic and thumbnail. And so I'm actually going to probably shift to, I love soulful videos and I want to keep that, but I think at least for the next phase, I'll probably just do B-roll in the hook, and then it'll be more of like talking head. It'll be a little less crazy, but the ideas are there. But the presentation, which people don't seem to care as much about, maybe I don't have to go as crazy.
It's interesting, man. We got to win our audience. That's the thing, right? It's like any business. It's like once you get to a certain point, those videos are going to be meaningful and people are going to watch. And the thing is, like, I still make those videos because I do it for myself. That's a question I ask myself. Well, even if I didn't get any views, would I still do it? Right.
Well, I was just scripting out a why I left investment banking video, and I actually was one of the reasons why I love these videos, is it helps me to learn about myself, and while helping people. It's like anyone that's thinking about banking or finance, they'll get a real perspective. But then for me, I'm like, oh, it's almost therapeutic. It's like, oh, these are the pros, these are the cons. This is why I left. I did that for like why I left VC, why I did music, why I left music. And I was like, it's like the self-discovery is definitely the best part. Well,
and I'm curious, for that script, are you scripting it or are you outlining it?
I'm outlining it right now. Basically the pros. I'll probably do bullets because I'm realizing with this kind of stuff, I'll just talk and it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And just give it to your editor, basically.
Yeah, because talking about what I know really well, it's my personal life, but it's also the industry of finance. Like I lived it. So it's like anything I say is going to be helpful. versus
Yes.
if I'm researching vulnerability, then I have to like, that's something I'm not great at, or I'm trying to
Yeah.
get better at. So if it's outside
Mhm.
of me, I have to do a lot of research. So,
Absolutely.
well, what would you've been doing this for close to 3 years. Like you've built up the Mind Map Nation. You got your newsletter, about to launch the podcast.
Mhm.
Um, you've basically done what, like the top, like a creator would want to do. And you're helping people, giving
Mhm.
people. Like what advice do you give to a new creator day that's starting from scratch? Like what would say be like the top three-ish things you would tell them?
Yeah, man. Like, gosh, I learned so much. I mean, honestly, this is actually like my 3-year anniversary. I think my first one was like March 20th or something. 4 days, literally like exactly three days. Oh, 3 years. Um, I think the first one would be like, nothing is perfect, right? Like I spent so much time on my first videos and stuff like that. And there's enjoyment in that, and that's actually important too. But the most important thing really is just to start, right? Like we get better by doing it. Um, and if you need to script out everything, hell, do that. That's how I started too, right? Like it's only recently that I started getting off the cuff, essentially. And even now, I still script out my intro 100% because you only have like 3 seconds to get people's
Yeah, the
attention.
hook. I
Your
mean, the
intro
hook, you
needs.
gotta just spend half the time on the script, the hook for sure. 50%
Um,
of the time on the hook.
Yeah, man. And that's the other thing, right? That brings up to my next point, which is know what really matters to get people's attention. So there's actually finding a balance between like catering to the masses because you're trying to like, got eyeballs or engagement, whatever. And then there's also the self-expression component. I think being a creator has always been like, walking this line almost, right? I feel like there are definitely people out there who are like supernaturals. Like they're just like my wife Olivia is a natural. You point a camera at her and she's just like begins talking, right? And she's engaging and all this stuff like that. But I'm more different, like I actually started off as more robotic and I still feel a bit more awkward on in front of an inanimate object like a freaking camera. And I'm
Yeah,
always
which is
clapping,
supernatural.
you're just clapping all the time, like I mean, it's like cut, 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 cut. I feel sorry for my editors because sometimes they have to literally go through like essentially an hour and a half of A-roll just to get to like 15 minutes of the footage, the final products.
I was
Sorry,
I
guys.
was shooting at like 10 p.m., like 11 p.m. once, and I was really tired,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
farted. It's like, oh no. I was like, well, I guess me and my editor are gonna have a deeper relationship now.
Oh gosh, yeah, you get real close with the editors because you're just like talking to yourself. You're just like, oh, that fire truck just went by. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like everybody else sees this like smiling face that's super energetic. You're like amped up and stuff, but real, it's just like social media, right? So, anyways, yeah, that's all part of that. Actually brings up to my next thing, which is it's all part of journey. You are going to experience highs and lows 100%. There's going to be and honestly, when you first start and stuff like that, it is even these days, I'm at like, 20 something thousand subscribers. My outcome goal is to actually reach 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year, right? In some ways, that actually gives me like a lot of pressure. And if I don't meet those kind of like goals, I inherently will feel like, I feel crappy. What's wrong with me? Why am I, all these social comparison stuff start coming up,
Yep.
which then leads to social anxiety, pressure, and you start not liking what you do. So whenever you feel like that, really do a pulse check, like slow down, stop, like, stop recording, stop writing, stop doing whatever you're doing. Because if you continue down this path, it is literally the sure path to burnout. And then you're going to need to like take 8 months like me to get back on a horse. It's just not worth it. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, you have to love the freaking journey. It's not about the destination. I know everybody says that, but it's so freaking true, right? You have to go back to your why.
So how do you balance that though? If you want to
Mhm.
serve, your why is to serve. You want to enjoy it, but you also want to go from 20 to 100K subs in a year. Like
Yeah.
how how do you hold those two things at once? Because I struggle with that. Because for me, I'm trying to get to 10K this year, and like,
Yes.
but then I'm like, so I'm thinking, okay, if I make 82 videos a week, so I'm making like say close to 90 videos, one of them will get like 50,000 views or 100,000 views, hopefully, and then that will be the thing that that
Yes,
portfolio theory, like that's the one that takes me to 10,000 subs. Like that's like my
exactly.
plan in my head. But then every week it's like, dude, did another video with 200 views. Like I'm starting to get the anxiety creeps up. Like, so how do you hold those two
Yeah.
things?
And that's actually a sign of I think a true creator slash artist slash actually intelligence of sorts, which is really holding contradictions at once. Actually, that's kind of the beauty of human beings in general. We're all walking contradictions. We all have like on one hand we want to create da da da, and then on the other hand we're trying to reach numbers da da da. Right? It's that's a great question, because the way I do it is actually to remind myself to frame it actually first of all as a game. Right? I try to frame the outcome. I frame the outcome goals as the game versus the process or the input goals as character development or personal leveling up,
Yep.
essentially. Right? Those two are actually I actually almost have like a different framing for these two things. The process is more personal because that is indicative of my character, of me as a professional, as me as an artist. The process matters so much more, right? Whereas the outcome is like a game, essentially. It's almost kind of like, oh, it'll be really cool. And then let's gun for it. And it gives me like that motivation. It wakes me up in the morning and stuff. Right. But at the end of the day, like, I just remind myself that um, what truly does matter, right? Like like at the end of the day, like the other thing, I guess I'm also fortunate, which is, you want to actually diversify. You want to think about what the numbers actually mean. Because as a creator, you don't necessarily need 100,000 subscribers to get monetization, for example, right? I will also think about sustainability. The first one is, again, process versus outcome goals have different weights and different framings, right? That's tip number one. Number two is think about your monetization strategy relatively early on. Think about uh, if you're doing part-time, that is your monetization strategy, right? Using your full-time job to fund this. Don't worry about it too much. Maybe get enough traction. But at 10,000 subscribers, I started thinking about, okay, is it consulting? Is it coaching? Is it creating like an online community that can, create recurring revenue? Is it selling like ebooks or whatever it is, right? And then start actually experimenting with people's willingness to pay, because that's the other thing that I learned from Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, which is
Yeah, great book.
yeah, great, fantastic book, right? Because the sign of a professional is that you get paid for what you do. Professional artist versus an amateur. So remember that if you want to turn pro, part of it is getting paid for what you do. This doesn't matter if you're a YouTuber, photographer, like cake maker, whatever it is. You know what I mean? If you want to turn pro, get paid. And that's actually another way for people to respect your time. And it's a way of respect and homage, essentially, to your work, right? So don't be afraid to do that. I would say, create that and wean off the reliance on the pure numbers. Because right now, like my coaching job work is actually really taking off. And the thing is, I don't need like 100,000 subscribers. I could just have like 1,000
Yeah,
and then
because
start
people want to
coaching.
pay you 500 an hour to basically
Yes.
help them solve things that their whole life is they're stuck on, or their careers they're stuck on, or their businesses, right? Like if you unblock them,
Yes.
you're helping
Yeah.
them a ton, and you
Yeah.
only need like 1,000 people that are yeah, or you don't
Yeah.
need 1,000,000 people to do that. Yeah.
And not only that, dude, like, these days, think about it. It's not even about the numbers, the pure numbers. It's about your digital footprint, right? Like, if I ever interview for any job or any even, position, I'm totally fine because I barely even need to go through the interview. I have an entire huge body of work that they can reference, that I can reference. They
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
know me before I step into the room. That's
Yeah,
a
if
huge
anyone wants to know
advantage.
how you think, if they watched
Yes.
your corporate to creator video and they see how
Dude.
you structured how you made that decision, I think they would be like, okay, this guy will think about everything and has weighed the risks and
Yes.
and knows the cost benefit. Like,
Yeah, dude. I mean, these days it's about optionality, right? By creating, you're actually creating optionality for yourself.
well, how do you I guess were there any mistakes you made in this process that
Hmm.
you would advise someone starting out to do differently, or lessons learned?
Oh man. Hmm. Interesting. I would say Oh man, I would say don't. Oh gosh. Oh geez, it's gonna sound really generic, but like get an editor actually in a lot of ways. That really helps. If you're able to afford it, definitely do that because it frees you up to do what you do best, which is create. Right. Um, the other thing is, I would say, um, time management is really really important. That's why I have the whole batching process, right? Because it helps me stay in the same mode. It's not even about like wearing different hats. It really is about the switching costs. You're going to get worn down just because you have to switch so many times, and that becomes very tiring. And that's not really, yes, that's part of the creative process, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that hard. I would say try to make it as easy as possible for you. Like basically like try to go through entire flow, your workflow, and then go, what kind of what kind of things can I either batch, process, or outsource, right? Those are like the two low-hanging fruits to streamline your process and make it less friction. Because otherwise, you're gonna it's actually gonna prevent you from creating, which gets me to my third and probably most important point, which is um and this is actually taking a bookmark from Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, right? Which is no work can possibly be a full reflection of who you are. Like like your work. There's so many times, and this is actually what Brene Brown calls life paralysis, which is you don't think what you create is good enough or perfect, right? And that actually prevents you from actually shipping it or putting it out there. I think Rick Rubin actually had a really good point, which is, well, just make the stakes lower, right? Your whole point of being an artist or a creator is to share your unique lens at this moment, because it's impossible for you to hold the same views tomorrow, a month from now, a year from now, whatever it is, right? Not only that, your job as an artist is to capture the lightning, follow the energy, because where there's energy, there is light, right? So I think that is extremely important, which is, you know, there's so many times in which I've had like these brilliant ideas for what I want to share, and I just saved it. I was like, oh, I saved it for a rainy day, and that rainy day never comes around again, right? That just, because everything changes and it doesn't hold the same emotional impact anymore. Literally, your job as an artist, your job as a creator is to capture lightning in a bottle and serve it to people. That's what you
Yeah.
do fundamentally,
Yeah.
right? Don't forget that. If you forget that, you're just saving it in a bank. And ideas and emotions as a rapidly depreciating asset to the extent that it becomes a liability
Yeah, they
because
get
it will weigh
stale.
you down. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, becomes yeah. I literally like filmed. I did the Camino de Santiago, like I walked for like 2 weeks across
Dude,
from Spain
hell
to
yeah.
Portugal.
That's right.
I vlogged it, and then all this stuff came up. I was like, oh, it's not perfect. And then I was like, oh, I need to make a documentary now that I have all this.
Yeah.
And now it's just sitting on my hard drive. And
Yeah.
I did it in May and now it's March
Dude.
like of
It's
next
a
year.
liability, man, because
Yeah.
it actually becomes baggage. It's not even an asset anymore, unfortunately. That's actually
Yeah. I need
the
to,
yeah,
I need to like find a way to get those videos done. Well,
for
so,
sure.
okay. So that's your advice of like, a lot of it is saving time. But I think if I boil it down is actually focusing on what's important and what you do best. And you do that by finding an editor, managing your time better, um, releasing things as they go. Don't be such a perfectionist. Um, like what when you make your videos, I can tell that you've talked about this. Like you love making excellent things, right? Like you make 100
Yes.
comments on a 20 like a short video.
Yes.
Um, my hypothesis is the right reason I'm a perfectionist is because I
Mhm.
link my self-worth to what I make. And so that's
Yeah.
me that people see on the video. So I want the mix, the automation of the volume to come
Yeah.
in just right when the B-roll hits, when the lighting and the LUT hits, like all this has to happen for like, and that's across a whole time series. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's because it's me on the line. So I'm a perfectionist about it. But what is it for
Totally.
you that drives you to be so excellent?
I want to make things I'm proud of. Ultimately, and this is actually really shifting away from perfectionism, which I am really framing it as like an external standard. It's almost kind of like, who am I trying to impress, right? Again, there's so many ways I can remind myself like life is short, causing a lot of anxiety, it's not worth it, like just go do it and do it for myself, really, right? So, and then the thing is, like, if I don't do it, I'm gonna hate, I'm not, the cost of not doing it outweighs the cost of doing it. So I would say like that doesn't take away from quality, but there's also kind of like an extent where I know at the end of the day I have to just like finish it and ship it.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when with your like philosophy on shipping, making videos,
Mhm.
creating, you talk about how you reclaimed your identity or you focused on your identity as an artist. Um, but you're clearly like a business person, a business mind as well, right?
Yes.
Um, so for you, how do you balance being an artist as well as an entrepreneur or integrate those? Because sometimes they can be polar opposites, it seems like doing it for myself, work I'm proud of, expressing myself. At other times it's like doing it for the audience, helping them. Um, how
Oh,
do you
dude.
merge those worlds?
Yeah, no, I actually had this whole existential kind of like crisis twice actually, over the last year, which is, how do I there's this Instagram post that I saw that really hit home, which was content is the worst thing to happen to art in recent years. Content is the worst thing to happen to art in recent years. What that really told me was that, ever since then, I was almost kind of like, shit. When am I just like catering to the masses completely? That really put in question what it meant by what I was doing, right? And at some point, I actually reconciled it.
Mhm.
Which is I actually think that art and content can coexist together. It's about how do you retain the soul of your content, right? And this is why I actually started like batch processing things, because once I started like breaking out my steps, I realized that the prep or the ideation writing part is the core soul of my content. Whereas filming is still there, sure, but the editing or the publishing and the distribution is not really the soul of what I do. That's content. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's almost kind of like once you actually are able to decouple the two, it makes so much more sense actually. And then I can just like freaking go outsource the certain thing, those part that what I bundle as content, and I retain what is art. And these days, this is actually something extremely important when we're going into like, GPT-4 and all the AI advances and stuff like that, right? When, like a machine can literally write a blog post on a couple prompts in 30 seconds, something that would take me like 10 hours of painstaking, handcrafted, like milling over all these ideas, trying to assemble this and stuff like that. So, my existential crisis came back and it was almost kind of like, oh shit, am I going to get replaced? What's the point of this? Like, da 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 da. So it went back to the core fundamental question, which was, if I become automated out, let's say AI can just do what I do and all that, would I still create? Will I still do what I do? Will I still write? Will I still express myself? Will I still talk? Da 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 da. The answer was yes. And this is when I knew that I would be a creator for the long haul, right? That regardless of whatever it is that comes up, I will still continue doing that because that is part of me. That is literally part of my self expression. And that is what I mean by the soul of the content. When I actually took that mindset, it's like coming to terms. It's like accepting all possibilities and you're still going to be okay. It's a very stoic mindset, by the way, right? Which is coming to terms with the worst possible scenario, which is, for Stoics, is actually coming like to terms with death so that you can truly know how to live and be free, right? In a way, coming to terms with the fact that I can be automated out as a content creator is like professional death, right? That counterintuitively actually allows me to live more fully, to really just go like, fuck, if all goes to hell, I'm still gonna be here, right? Then what is there to worry? Funny enough, this actually makes me take more of a kind of like, let's use AI as a tool because it will never replace the soul of what I do. I can lean far more into change than actually be afraid of change.
I love it. I love it. It's like it reminds me of I don't know if you've read like Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, but she
Mm.
in the preface, it's like applying her Zen studies practice to
Hmm.
writing essentially. And
Yeah.
the intro is basically it's like I think it's like a Jack Kerouac quote from On the Road, or it's like
Nice.
a paraphrasing, but it's basically like before writing, accept death, accept like all loss, and then you can go and write.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like if hey,
Definitely.
if AI can write and writing is the soul, but yeah, they're never going to be able to express you and be you. I think they can
Mhm.
approximate it. It can look like it, but yeah.
Yeah.
I, we can. I mean, that's a whole nother thread. Like AI,
Totally.
it's my cousin. He's a whole data guy. He's like a ex hedge
Yes.
fund guy that loves data and ML and models and stuff. He's like, yeah, check out this new jazz composition that AI made, and
Hmm.
it's like, check out this poem. I'm like, it can look like it, but it's not. Like it'll sound close, but I don't think it'll
Yeah.
ever. It's that part of humanity that,
Hmm.
yeah, what you're saying, the soul. Like every person that's unique, the personality, you can approximate it. You can make like a fake Louis Vuitton bag, or you can like copy something. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that spark ever gets copied by a machine.
Yeah, and who knows, right? Like, it's so funny, man. Like the other day, I was actually thinking about maybe the real benefit of AI is that maybe it will replace so many of what we do to the extent that we might give up on competing on steel metrics, right? Like AI is just so much smarter than we are in so many ways. It's just it's insane. So in that respect, it's almost kind of like I am actually kind of hopeful. This is going to be kind of really outlier thinking, but I'm hopeful that we can finally start competing on capitalistic and commercial terms and just let the machine do its thing, right? And then we can actually and we don't even have a choice in this. It's going to automate so many things out. However, humans are funny creatures where we have to have meaning in our lives. It is like such an evolutionary advantage if you think about it. This desire to create, this desire for purpose and meaning literally drives survival and thriving in this planet. That's actually why we're like the dominant species here. So I have no doubt that when AI replaces or automates like all the metrics that we currently compete on, which is steel metrics, we are forced to actually find other metrics essentially to find meaning, which could be silver and creativity, right? So yeah, you can use AI to create, but that's just another tool to reach that goal.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like if you actually if you assume that like the whole Maslow's hierarchy is somewhat true, right? Going from security all the way to self actualization, then it's like,
Yes.
yeah, AI automation. You can automate an investment banking analyst, the guy that builds the models. You can automate the growth marketer. You can you can automate all these jobs that I've done. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, to your point, then once those bottom layers of the hierarchy are taken care of by a machine, then we can actually
Yes.
focus on our feelings, our meaning, like the meaning in life, like
Yeah.
building
And
community,
And
relationships.
honestly, to create for create's sake, right? Rather than for the numbers. That's actually what I mean. Like you maybe one day AI becomes so good and automates so many things out that you don't even have to worry about getting the numbers for the money's sake. Right? You can literally create for the sake of just sharing and self-expression. Then why use AI at that point to fake it if there is no more steel or commercial interest?
Yeah, I've heard theories of I forget the name of it, but it's basically like a theory of automation leads us to surplus, and then basically everyone is fed, everyone has security, shelter, and
Yeah.
then where do you what do people do from there? But the shadow, the devil's advocate view would be, it's like because of human, whether you want to call it greed or need for progress, it'll never be enough. Because when your neighbor's AI is pumping out more views or more widgets than your AI is pumping out, then you got to get a faster chipset. All right, you gotta
Yeah.
or you got to get.
Well, no, it's true, man. Because honestly, talking about Maslow's, we actually have all the capabilities today to fulfill self-actualization. We don't like, we, especially in the US and in the rich countries, we have so much, we actually live in a world of abundance, yet we still feel so scarce. And I think that scarcity is very much intentionally driven because it makes money essentially, right? For a certain number of people. So that scarcity is, in my mind, is actually quite artificial if you think about it. So much of it is driven by our need for more. And it's interesting, man. Like, I actually think that our desire to create is tied to our desire for more. And I was listening to Brene Brown's Atlas of Heart this morning, and she was actually saying how gratitude is actually one of the antidotes
Mm-hmm.
to essentially wanting more, right? Celebrating essentially what you have. It's actually a practice that you can actually do. So I actually think that we all have actually more than enough to be fine. Whatever game we're playing is really, of our own making.
Yeah, the crazy thing is like, like at Berkeley, like we studied economics, right? And it's like
Yeah.
the science of like studying scarcity. And then we study at Haas or at LBS, it's like competitive advantage. Like it's how do you position in the market? And then you draw a chart and it's like it's a contained thing, and then you have to kill and beat and differentiate against everyone else in that little bucket.
Yes.
But I think as I create more, I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's a different way to look at things, and it's not this science of scarcity, it's a science of abundance. Like like I am
Yeah.
starting to see a little bit more of that. Like, do we have to be competing, or no, if it's like a blue ocean that's expanding, like, yeah, all the boats will rise. We don't have to like kill the other boats or be better than the other
Yep.
boats. Like we can
Yeah.
be our own boat in our own little plot, and the plot keeps getting bigger. Like,
Yeah. But you know what? That is such a counterintuitive thing, right? Because um, that's a mindset that I'm trying to take these days and really try to remind myself. But even for me, it is not like instinctual. It's it's almost kind of like when you see somebody getting better, it's almost like there's like a social comparison that immediately happens. And I'm trying to catch myself. And I think the awareness and mindfulness of that is like the first step to weeding out that mindset.
oh yeah, for sure. I there's so many times like when I first got into Matt Davella, I was like, oh man, I was trying to do personal challenge videos like him, and I look at my video and it was like shot on a phone. It was all janky. The audio was clipping. The lighting was jacked up. My
Yeah,
set was all bad. I was like, I was really down on myself for like a week or two. I was like, I'll never be that good. But then I was
totally.
like, wait, okay,
Yeah,
shift it from comparison to inspiration. Oh wow, what do I love about it? Like, oh, it's because
yeah,
his composition, his lighting, the way he creates tension in the hook, like. And then I started learning, and
absolutely.
I took his course, and now
Yeah.
I'm starting to do more of it. It's like that's a struggle. Like, well, how do you for you, do you ever make videos that you feel like you're doing it for yourself, or you're proud of it, but then it doesn't resonate with the audience? Like,
Oh yeah, that's like every other silver video that I make. Those are the ones ironically that I put the most work in, right? And I think a lot of creators talk about that. I know like, Ali Abdal's like folks, I think Elizabeth talks about that too. Like, once in a blue moon, she'll create like, some video about her art or something like that, right? Those are the ones that really mean a lot to her. But they don't get nearly as much views as, other stuff. I think that's just but that's okay too, because honestly, like when that happens, I try to think about like what is there's social media, and then there's the social part of social media, right? There's like the touching lives. It's like even if I'm able to like touch even like one person or five people or something, I've done my job. If you take that mindset, everything else is just gravy, icing on the cake.
yeah, I'm trying to shift my KPI to like my dream comment. Like, how many dream comments can I get on a video? Like, of like, hey, thank you, this helped me so much, or this helped me to really uncover this side of myself I never knew. Or that,
Yeah.
to me, if I can get one of those on a video, then I'll be like, okay, I did a good video. Versus like, oh, it went to 2,000 views all of a sudden. Like, if I didn't have the comment, like,
Yeah.
that it really helped that one person, then, and if it does, and I think that's freed me up. It's freed me up. I don't, when I take 2 days to edit the last thing, when I
Yeah.
go, well, I ask myself, is this going to help someone? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, let's post it.
Yes. Well, and this is what I love about, this podcast that you're doing, Peter, is that, I can see how much, first of all, I can see how much you enjoy it, right? That is the first and foremost. That is the most important thing, because you're doing it for yourself. And I think the second part is that 100% this, we've talked for 2 hours, right? And I 100% know that it will help at least one person out of the 2 hours. There's going to be some kind of insight, and it's going to be helpful. So you've already achieved both goals, and that's something to be proud of. And I'm just telling you, just don't ever freaking stop, man. Like, Keep going. You're doing great.
Thank you. Yeah, there's probably that person at a Deloitte or Goldman right now that's that they're all tabbing out to this while they're at work, and they're hiding their notepad with their lyrics or poetry, and hopefully
Yeah,
this gets them to take one step towards sharing that poetry or something. Well,
for sure.
the kind of getting into some medium fire questions, like what's pretty quickly, like what's the craziest thing you've ever mind mapped out? Like the most complex.
Yeah. Afghanistan. When the US pulled out of Afghanistan, it was the most complicated, because up until now, I've only mapped out like, business stuff that had objective truth. So essentially, my intention with it was I was just kind of shocked with like the human suffering that was involved with it. So I was like determined to actually figure out what was going on, and I dove into like documentaries, history. In these kind of like scenarios, I never really look at the news. I know the news is sensational and there's a different interest to it, right? And because I'm a systems thinker, I'll actually dive into stuff literally that is slow thinking and made before the hype happened, because those contain more of the contextual, truth essentially. But what I realized is that, goddamn, like, our human world is so complicated. This goes back to the human world is such a we're walking contradictions, right? Like, I realized that mapping out Afghanistan was way tougher than mapping out, let's say, something like global climate change, right? Which is already one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces. The reason for that is because climate change has objective truth. There's scientific truth to it. There's actually studies that can do. You can connect the dots. You can have cause and effect. Even though it's an extremely complex system, it's still mappable. What I realized about Afghanistan is that it's about human stories. It's about competing human stories, where you have essentially three different empires, right? The British, the USSR, and the US interests versus essentially the Afghanis, who then is distributed amongst the rural versus the urban and the distribution of different powers, right? So in terms of that, in every era, in every, like, even in present day, there is this competing human truths, because it's almost like both sides have their own truth. So then which one is like, valid, right? That's when I realized, holy crap, there's like a parallel world. There is the physical world that follows the laws of nature and physics. And then there's a human world where we kind of follow it, but we also make things up as we go along. Like this whole like concept of money and even the run on banks is a reminder that these are just imaginary constructs that we all agreed that, hey, this is the way, the system, that these are the laws that we're going to follow. So in some respects, that was both the messiest, but also was extreme. That was the messiest thing I mind mapped. But also taught me an important lesson, which is, if the human world is of rules that we created, that means we can also change them, right? We don't have to take them for as like the laws of physics, like gravity. That is actually a hopeful kind of like silver lining, because these days all we hear about is the negativity and the shit that's going on and stuff. But the fact that we actually have the ability to change it as well, because we're not bound to it. So anyways, that was a fundamental actual lesson and mindset shift that kind of just gave me a lot more flexibility, in terms of thought about looking at our human systems.
I love that, man. Like you take a situation like Afghanistan and then you distill down what we make, the stories we tell ourselves as people, as societies, as countries, as a planet. Like it can change. And
Yes.
that's
And that's
hope,
what
man.
matters.
That's hope.
That's hope. Yeah. But that also means that the power of the human narrative, right? Like whoever controls the story or the narrative actually is in control of our reality. But that reality can change is the positive message.
Yeah. And then and like kind of drilling it down to like onto a more personal level, like the narrative of your life. Like what's one decision that you've made that has changed the trajectory of your life, that's changed the meaning, the direction of your life? And then also how'd you make that decision? Because I know you talk a lot about how you use structured thinking to make good decisions.
Man. I would say rewriting my own personal stories, right? Because, it goes back to the power of narrative. I always think about like, who I am today is of all the different experiences, but also of what, people have told me that I should or should not be. And this is, that's why I filmed my whole 1,000 subscriber special, which is like wrestling the pen of my personal story away from others and into my own, so that I can actually write my own story of sorts, because that is like my OS. That is like the algorithm in which I will follow, right? Examples of that, for example, like my verb, um, it's interesting. It's like, how can we actually reprogram our own personal narratives so that we can live the way we actually want to, without that kind of baggage, or even perfectionism is an external source, for example. It's another narrative that can change.
Got it. So rewriting your own personal stories, and it doesn't have to, taking the pen away from society conditioning, taking the pen back in your hand. And that's how you became the main character in your story. Check that video
Yeah.
out if you're out there listening. So what's the worst decision, or one of the worst, or a bad decision you've made, and or where you've learned the most?
Man, I would say that I've made some pretty bad, I've many bad decisions, actually. I would say, a lot of it comes from in my relationships, actually. I would say, romantic relationships in particular. I've learned a lot. It's almost like when people think about like toxicity and stuff like that, that's actually where a lot of my personal lessons like come from. And I realized that, this is where vulnerability is so important, because if you're not vulnerable or honest with, let's say, like the person that is supposed to be the closest to you, it's interesting. Like sometimes we're like invulnerable to the people who are closest to us, right? Yet we share so much more with like other people. So there's almost kind of like a counterintuitive part for that. And I realized that vulnerability and honesty is actually one of these accelerants of relationships, where when it's absent, I can be in a relationship and live with the person for like 2-3 years and not know them as deeply as somebody that I am just diving into that deepness, essentially, within like a week. So it's a relationship accelerant that I learned through kind of like the hard way, and broken hearts and stuff like that, to really step into, because I know the cost of that is worse. Right. And it's actually in the rewards of it has been really meaningful. I would say in the last 3 years, this is something that I've been really practicing. Like whenever somebody asks me a question, there's like two answers that I can take. There's the honest but vulnerable one, and then there's the honest but not really vulnerable one, right? There's a split path. There's literally like a
Yeah.
visual path that appears before me. So it's like, which path do you take? Um, the interesting thing about vulnerability is that it's like a muscle. The more
Yeah.
you go down the path of vulnerability, it actually gets easier. Because what you'll find is that people are not as judgmental as you think they are. Also, because we're just not as important as we think we are, right? There's two sides of the same coin. So in that respect, there's like, I have far more positive, again, feedback loops, right? Reinforcement and outcomes from sharing more of myself than not. Because what I found is that people are actually craving, especially in today's age, like we're craving for more transparency, for getting to get to know the real person, because these days we don't really have as much like social interaction in real life. I'm still feeling the as I, earlier I showed kind of like my map of social anxiety. The contributions of that social anxiety is immense, right? And I think COVID has not made it easier. And these Zoom calls, even though they're great, they still don't replace the in real life like interactions of eye contact, of physical like contact and all that. So I'm very mindful of that these days, which is when I do have that opportunity to do so, I try to exercise it for myself, really.
I love it. So vulnerability, just constantly practicing that, building up the muscle. Yeah, I feel like it's so hard, especially, coming from, if anyone's in the business world, right, you have to be professional, right? And then
Yeah.
like I think especially with like business school types like us, that have come from that world, it's like you can't show weakness. You have to always be on
Hmm.
point. You always
Gotta be
have to
perfect.
you have to position yourself in a certain way. You have to be strategic. There's internal and there's external. Like how do you position?
Yeah.
It's like I'm like I think those work great in the professional world, but personally I'm like trying to
Hmm.
merge the internal and external. So there's not two sides of me. So
Yeah,
yeah, what you said really resonates.
and that's actually the counterintuitive part, which is that, I actually think that when you're able to actually be more authentic and vulnerable, even in the professional world, of course there's like boundaries and stuff like that, as well as confidentiality that you should probably adhere to.
Of
Yes.
course.
um but opening up has doesn't really it can actually really actually work in your favor as well, I would say. This is what I actually found, is that, you're just more human in that respect. Not only is it better for you to like be more relaxed, but I think everybody else is just like kind of breathe a sigh of relief too.
Yeah. I think connecting on that level is on a human level. I think for any relationship, whether it's personal or professional, I think in a business relationship, if you actually like big multi-million dollar deals are done where a VC invests in a startup, they'll
True.
put 10 million into a startup, not just because of the numbers and the market size and product, but because of
No.
the
Yeah.
team. They're like, I trust you. And it's like, I know you, I trust you. And yeah. Yeah. So I feel like there's going to be
Mhm.
there is a shift where part of that, like authenticity, vulnerability that leads to deeper connection. And it sounds cheesy, but it probably makes for better business too. Like being real.
100%.
Well,
100%. Yeah.
how do you, this is an audience question, kind of
Yes.
related. It's from Azul. So Azul asks, what does Sheng think about executives that make decisions with their gut? They feel they have the
Mm.
touch and don't need any fancy decision analysis. Like, so how
Hmm.
do you balance intuition versus all this structured thinking, right? The rational.
Yeah, no, for sure, 100%. So I actually, what I think about is that there's a time and place for that, right? This is where I actually talk about in one of my videos, and actually one of the frameworks I use, which is called Rilke questions. And it comes from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, Laozi young poet, where he basically says that, there are certain questions in our lives. Sometimes the most personal and deepest questions is that you have to love the questions, like books written in a foreign language that you don't know yet, right? Or locked doors that you don't have the keys to yet. Love the questions so that you can eventually live the questions so you can eventually live into the answers. What that tells me is that there are certain questions, let's say decisions, even in business, that you have to make, that you can try to predict using, data, logic, rationality, whatever it is, right? But then there's also a subset of questions, the other part of the questions in our lives there, you literally just have to take the leap of faith. You can't overthink it, because there's no amount of data in the world that's going to be able to validate or invalidate you, right? So it's a bit of an art, actually. I would say, like, for all the leaders out there who only purely make decisions on data, you're going to be missing out on some pretty crazy good opportunities as well, right? But if you're only doing it on gut decisions, then you're kind of a bit of a wild card. There's almost kind of, then you're not tapping into the well of knowledge and resources that are in your fingertips. So I think I would say my thing is that it's not even a 50-50. It depends on circumstance, but I definitely use data, because honestly, that's actually what mind mapping is for. It's actually collecting data. It's about laying the data in front of you, so you can't lie about the factors, right? And you can see the connections with everything. But at the end of the day, you have to make that final decision. And this is where the mindset, this is where like leaping into it and that emotional gut feeling matters.
Well, how would someone know when is the right time and place? Like, is it when, because I know, people, I've read this book, like how do we decide? And they were saying how for you generally with like deciding on who you're going to date or hire people, like your intuition, that super brain, the subconscious brain can really give you the insights much better than a bunch of data and a paper resume on that person. But then
Mhm.
things for like, yeah, math, science, physics. Yeah. Obviously the data matters. But like, yeah, I guess how would you, do you have a sense on what places it makes more sense to use data versus like, and what places makes more sense to use your intuition?
Yes. Yeah. So I would say it also depends on, okay, so if you're talking about the professional world, right? If you're talking about professional world, there's actually a wealth of data out there for the most part. There's a lot of, how do I say it? I'm thinking about, okay, so I'm going to give an example from augmented reality, Sturfy and stuff, right? The reason why I made that decision, jump into this startup, wasn't based on data necessarily. It wasn't like, at the time, Pokemon Go or Niantic was like the big behemoth, but that was it. Maybe Snapchat, maybe a couple other guys. Meta was just, this was pre-Meta, it was still Facebook, right? I made the choice based on feel ultimately, right? It was almost kind of like, oh, I felt like this team had, for actually no, it was also data. There was a combination of the two. I thought like a VC. I was like, okay, well, they're not like, crazy burn rate. They have like all engineers. I'll be coming in as like the only business person, so I can actually make an impact, right? And they have the capabilities of build. If anything, they're all builders. They need me in that respect, right? And they did. So all those things checked out as like a professional, as a like a VC or whatever, and also the market too. I was like, oh, at the very least, they'll get a lot of acquisition offers from like Niantic, Snapchat, Facebook, and they did, right? Week 2, Niantic approached us for acquisition talks, right? So it was really based on like, so that kind of checked out, but ultimately it was almost kind of like, am I gonna be working well with these people based on my gut feeling from my other startups? Do I have conflicts in terms of like philosophy, product philosophy and stuff like that with the founders, right? Can we actually get along? Da, da, da. That's kind of like the gut feel. So it's a bit of a, like the combination of the two. So in that instance, like it kind of checked out because I hedged my bets, because even if I jump into it with my gut feeling, I'll still be hedged. Right.
Yeah.
So that's one example. That's actually on the professional side. So definitely hedge your bets, right? Come to terms with the worst case scenario that can happen. Because ultimately, just keep in mind, dude, like ultimately, none of this matters. That's actually one of my conclusions. Like nothing matters. In the grand scheme of things, we're just specks of dust in the cosmos, like in a universe, in grand vast time. All this is a bit of a game, right? Which begs the question of what does matter. What does matter is like, connections, family, love, our experiences, what makes us feel pain, joy, all these things, right? Sounds really woo-woo, but honestly, that's actually what matters. So if you keep in mind, both simultaneously understand that nothing matters and everything feels like it matters to you, then you can kind of hone in. So let me back up. When it feels like everything matters to you, because like what you do feels like the world, first of all, remind yourself nothing matters. And then once you're emptied out, remind yourself what does actually matter, right? And then go back to a decision and then go, oh, well, the stakes are not that high. I think we should go take that chance. I think when you have that life paralysis or that decision paralysis, it's when you think that everything matters. And this is where data paralysis happens.
Yeah. So just emptying out, just realizing it doesn't matter that much, lower the stakes. and then if you're, because I've heard people say like, if you want to decide on who you want to marry, it's like, it's a decision where you say yes when you're drunk. So it's like a very emotional decision. But then when you wake up the next day and you're sober, and you're thinking rationally, it's still a good decision.
Oh,
like,
100%.
So if like you have the head and the heart in there.
Well, I mean, this is actually how I ended up like, dating my now wife, Olivia, right? Because, before I prefer her, I dated like a very particular type of like girl. It's like East Asian, very proper, educated, it's not like she's not, but like, she's so left field from everything, but so opposite of who I am and who I typically date. So when I decided to just go exclusive with her, it was a Relka type question. It was very much feel, because she didn't fit any of the data points or framing or molds that I'm used to. Again, I have no previous data from an algorithmic standpoint. So I had to almost make like a Relka question, which was, what I knew was if I didn't give this a solid shot and go all in, I would definitely regret it. That was enough for me to just like go in. That's a Relka type question, 100%.
Yeah. So it's almost like a leap of faith in a way where the data can only take you so far, and it's really how you felt.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, are there kind of zooming out? Are there mental models that you like in your mind? Are there basically like a few set of mental models that you go back to a lot, like using that top down view? Like you're like, okay, let me
Mhm.
apply the who, what, when, where metrics. Or like, okay, let me apply this one here. Let me apply like, is that how
Oh
you kind of think?
yeah.
You have different models, and then like, what would say you would be like the top three that you use the most?
I use quite a few. Actually, I would say, one of the top ones. I actually make my own mental models. I literally wrote like an article around like how to create mental models for yourself, because it's good to adopt other people's mental models or inspire from like physics, chemistry, and the whole Charlie Munger suite. That's great, but at the same time, if you're able to create your own mental models, you become such a better critical thinker, right? You're actually much more observant about your own experiences and thinking like a scientist. All right. So first one is scale. So macro versus micro. Whenever I think about, actually, back up. The first one actually comes from Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is understanding the nature of things. And he has a line which is, it will be a shame, or it will be foolish for you to expect a fig tree to produce anything but a fig, right? And that one line, what it means is that, uh-oh, are we back?
Yeah, we're back. We're back. So what it means
Okay, cool.
is,
What it means is that if you don't understand the nature of something, you're going to be surprised, most likely negatively surprised, right? So, what that okay, anyways, just checking the internet connection. So let's say you're going to a startup from corporate, right? If you
Mhm.
expect the startup to be as stable as corporate, then you're going to be sorely disappointed, essentially, right? Or if you enter into, let's say, a relationship, you don't understand the nature of the person, and then after like 6 months or something like that, you're like in a toxic relationship, you can't get out and stuff like that. You ask yourself, oh crap, how did I get here? Well, most likely you did not understand the nature of the person that you're dealing with, or the nature of the company or the opportunity you're going into. Because so many of the times and this is like why I mind map as well, which is I'm trying to apply an objective, lens to all the different factors of a thing, a person, or opportunity, whatever it is, to try to, almost frame it as like as objective as possible, to understand the nature of it, so that I can actually, okay, I'm going to give you another example, which is the nature of a business is its business model, right? So Facebook can talk about like all the, CSR stuff, or the fact that it's not like, it's like, doing for the users, da, 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 da. But at the end of the day, it's based on an ads model. A business that is publicly traded, that reports to a board of directors, is beholden to essentially the business model. Or you can also think about it as the nature of Facebook could also be Mark Zuckerberg, because he has the most shares, right? So in that respect, you actually have, two things. You can understand the nature of something much better rather than corporate speak. Understanding the nature of something cuts through a lot of noise, right? Because you can always trace it back to that. So in that respect, the second mental model that I like to use is scale, which is micro versus macro. Whenever we talk about, like, let's say, experiences and stuff, my mind is actually simultaneously thinking about this experiential thing, but I'm also thinking about, oh, where else would it apply? Would it apply to other like people, scenarios, at what scale, right? I'm constantly zooming in and out.
Yep.
And this is actually how I form frameworks, which is I'm like a data slurping machine. I go through life literally just like super observant, and I can't help but think like this.
Mhm.
So in that respect, whenever I collect enough data, let's say, experiences or whatever, I start going like, okay, what are the patterns? Does it apply at a grand scale? So, for example, when I talk about this whole like, human stories and how there's contradictions and stuff, right? And it's because we humans, the micro units, the individual, the micro units of a society is contradictory. We literally, everything matters, yet nothing matters, right? That's an example of our existence, that we're contradictory. So, of course, the larger aggregate called society or civilization will hold on or derive its nature from the building blocks, which is micro, right? So then basically the question I ask myself is, at what point does the macro, the aggregate, retain the nature of the building blocks? And at what point does the nature completely change, right? So, for example, mob mentality is an example where the aggregate nature changes compared to the individual. Individually, humans are kind, but in aggregate, we can do really shitty things, right? This is an example where the
Mm.
aggregate, the macro nature changes. Again, it's combining the nature of something with scale, right? So the mental models can actually interact with each other and actually complement each other as well. And this is where mind mapping actually helps, because once I expand out the elements, I'm able to analyze individual factors based on a particular model and mix the models too.
Got it. So you can zoom in to like the fourth, fifth order of a topic, to the details, the
Yes,
minutia, this micro, or you can just zoom out and see the forest. So you can see the
always.
forest at the same time. You can see the
Yes,
trees, and you can see the connections
simultaneously.
between them. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. So those are two.
Nice.
And then the final one, yeah,
Mhm.
the final one's a silver and steel, right? That's like my master model that I apply to a lot of stuff. So
God, the external, internal world. And can you take us through like first principles thinking? Like when I was at the startup,
mhm,
our CEO, I really love what he said. He was like, yeah, in a defined situation, it's
mhm.
good to just go for the best practice, and then you can follow that. Um, in an undefined situation, for him, that's when it's good to use first principles thinking. And then everyone in startups is always saying first principles, even if it's a bad idea, they're like, oh, well, let's just use first principles. And yeah, let's go get mixed greens for lunch. Or like, it's like people throw that word around a lot, especially in Silicon Valley. Like you've lived
Yeah.
it, you practice it. Like what is first principles to you, and when's the best time to use it?
Yeah, man. First principles thinking at the end of the day is just the bare building blocks of a concept or an idea, right? Like this is where like mind mapping is really helpful. So let's say you start with like, a big hairy question like, what niche we should, to tackle or something like that, right? And you start asking like, who is it? What is the pain? And then you start breaking it down, right? And it's like you start breaking it down. It's like, oh, the 25-year-old me. Why? Well, it's because he feels, stuck. He's looking for more meaning. And then you go ask, well, why is he looking for meaning? And then you keep on going until you can't, it becomes indivisible, right? It literally is the atomic level of understanding of a concept where you can no longer mind map it and divide it out. Because the whole point, actually, at the core of mind mapping, I didn't mention this, which is at the core of mind mapping is deconstruction. That's really what it is, right? It's actually just like you take one question or one concept and you just keep on dividing and dividing and dividing it up until you can't anymore. And then you have the assembly, the parts as well as the whole together, right? So when I think about first principle thinking, it's literally at the very outer layers essentially of the outer bounds of the mind map. That is number one, the probably where the principles and lie, but also it's also representative of the edge of your own knowledge and understanding, right? So maybe it'll actually keep on extending. Maybe we'll figure out maybe eventually why humans need meaning, right? That could actually, this is where Andrew Huberman, the Stanford like neuroscientist, actually breaks down.
Mhm.
Then that node of humans need meaning then actually can have a neurological and biological explanation and can keep on going, and that actually expands the map even further, right? That means our human understanding. Then that becomes the new first principle, which is that us humans need meaning because we're driven by neurological impulses or evolutionary biology or something like that. And that becomes the new first principle. However, first principle is also dependent on the context, because understanding the neurological mechanisms of an organism doesn't help necessarily in business decision making, right? In that context of trying to figure out closing deals, all you need to understand is fear, greed, and identity. Essentially, that's all you need to understand. That's actually the first principles those are the principles that you need to understand closing business deals. You don't need to understand the neurological mechanisms, right? So first principles is almost a relative term of sorts. It depends on the context and the problem they're trying to solve, right?
But how did you come up with those three things? Because I would argue that I get what you're saying, that it all probably comes down to three things to do a business deal. But then I guess the debate is, what are those? And the question is, how do you come up with those three things? Because I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of times when I was at the startup, we would talk about first principles when we're like deciding on how to do a growth funnel or a product design. But it would be like it's debatable how you come up with those first building blocks, though. Like, I guess, how do you think through that?
Yeah, so this
It,
actually goes back to actually how you would form your own mental models, right? So greed, fear, and identity is my own mental model that I applied using the experience that I have lived and the observations that I have essentially observed through closing deals in Korea, Japan, Dubai, and the US. It's almost like these are different levers that you can pull at different times during the deal and different arguments you can frame based on those three buckets, right? So in a lot of ways, like first principles to me is actually they're kind of like similar essentially, or if not synonymous to certain frameworks. I would say that the best frameworks utilize first principles and organize them in a useful way. First principles by themselves are actually not that useful. It's actually how you arrange the building blocks of first principles that is what's useful. And what you're trying to arrange needs to actually like fit the why again, the objective, right? So that, again, my first principles come actually literally from empirical observations. And it's funny because this is actually how Vipassana and meditation and everything like came together as well. Literally, like, Gautama, the Buddha, sat under a tree and observed himself literally like a scientist. Meditation and Vipassana is actually very scientific, is what I realized. He literally was taking the human experience, his own experiential, experience, and then crafting a framework around it. So he was a scientist, and he created his own mental model.
so for you, like the coming up with the elements when using first principles thinking is the atomic essence, the atomic elements that answers the key question. And generally those can be found at the edges, the edge nodes of a mental model. Is that
Yes,
fair to
or a
say?
mind map.
Yeah, mind map. Got it.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I know we've been talking for a long time and you've shared so many gems.
Yep.
Wrapping up questions, like so your mind map nation, it's like, it's people that love structured thinking, connected thinking, using mind maps to make better decisions. Can you just tell us like why you started that community?
Yeah, man. It's really a way to. Oh, first of all, it's hard to grow alone, really. It's actually in the name. Like people who are connected thinkers and mind mappers, we're kind of a strange group. And I'm not saying that, it's just us. I think it's every human being. Like we all have associative thinking abilities. Like our associative thinking abilities is like still far outstrips that of, artificial intelligence. So in that sense, like, for people who are mind mappers and connected thinkers, um, it's almost kind of like you're so curious about the world. When you see the world, you see it in kind of like, frameworks, or you see it in kind of like different lenses. And when you do that, sometimes you feel alone because a lot of times people just think in terms of cause and effect, right? First order thinking, which is just like you don't think past like the second node or the main node. You don't keep on asking the questions like 3-4 levels deeper, right? So I really created this nation, or this community for people who are like really curious and are always still questioning, who don't really typically, who feel a little bit like they're surrounded by people who are not questioning enough. And then bringing them together, it's almost kind of like we can actually just like talk about these different, like we can go really low level or a really high level, just giving people like an outlet of reflection too. And then I have people dialing in from like Singapore, Tennessee, like freaking like the UK, Germany. And the commonality is that, they're not finding the kind of conversation that we're having like in the real life physical communities around them. So I figured, hey, let's break some barriers, use technology, and connect the dots.
Got it. So it's almost like a web of, it's almost like a mind map of deeper thinkers, like people that think through not just the first node, but the second, third, fourth, fifth node. But that's the first layer. But then the people
Yeah.
that actually connect the most
Yes.
important parts of that map. And so it's very meta. You're like connecting all these deep thinkers with your mind map nation.
Yeah, and that's actually how you kind of create change as well, right? Because I'm hoping that, we can enable each other and actually bring forth this way of thinking, deeper thinking, essentially into our local communities. It's almost like you come together in a hub, but really I would like, our members to actually like, take what they learn and take the spirit of that into their daily lives too. It just gives an opportunity to exercise that muscle.
and then also make impact in their own communities. I like that. Well, moving
Yeah.
into the rapid fire, what's your favorite piece of YouTube gear?
Oh man, gosh. I got this freaking this mic that I got, this lapel mic. It's so small. I don't know if I have it. But anyways, it's a it's kind of like that DJI like lapel mic going on.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the name now. Oh, Hollyland, like the M1 Lark. So that one has game changing because I can't always use the shotgun mic when I'm on the go, and especially when I'm recording shorts and stuff, which is like super ad hoc and more spontaneous. I don't want to set up the whole thing. It's wireless recording straight to my phone, straight to my Loom videos and all that. So I love that.
Nice. Favorite notebook for mind mapping?
Gosh, I got my traveler's notebook right here. This guy is my second brain, the OG second brain. So this goes with me everywhere. Yep.
Nice. Favorite erasable pen?
Let's see. We got the friction ball clicker from Pilot. Definitely turns any notebook into a whiteboard. And
riffing off of that, Oliver asked, basically, how do you decide when to use paper versus digital for mind mapping?
It's about spontaneity, fluidity versus how much data am I looking at, right? So for example, something that we just mapped out, what is my niche? That's actually simple enough where I can just like draw it out with you. And the thing is, it's actually far easier for me to just like fluidly annotate, connect the dots, draw arrows and stuff like that. But if I'm actually working on, let's say like a multi-month project, like My Map Nation, where I have like several different deliverables and stuff, or let's say making a developer portal or product for my company, I need to be able to actually expand out all the complexity, the different user flows, and share it with like, my team members and stuff like that. They can't read my chicken scratch. So that's when I shift over to digital.
Got it. It's like quick and dirty, can be physical, but
Yes.
if it's in depth, if it's complicated and you need collaboration, then digital makes more sense. Cool. And then favorite book you read in the last year?
Oh God. I would say that Atlas of a Heart is amazing. It's also because I think in terms of mind maps, and it's literally Atlas. It's like the map.
Yeah, an emotional map.
Emotions. I've been actually meaning to just like literally map out the different concepts. I think that would be a really cool project.
Oh yeah, dude, you got to make that one. I'll definitely watch that. Favorite course you took in the last year?
Ooh, I'm currently taking actually the LogSeq course from One Stuttering Mind, Dario. Forgot his last name, but it's actually really good. It got me started, on LogSeq and the whole second brain craze, and it's actually been working out. I like it.
Nice. And if your place was burning down, and assuming all your loved ones are safe, what 3 things would you grab first?
Ooh. Oh man. Okay, definitely notebook. This is my brain and my heart. I would bring my, probably no, laptop is actually okay. Yeah, you know what? I'm actually very minimalistic, honestly, just my notebook. That's all I really need. I would bring like Marcus Aurelius's meditations. Actually, this thing, you see how like dog-eared this thing is? It's kind of insane. It's just completely like ripped up and ripped.
It looks like a wolf.
It's gone through a lot. Looks like a wolf, exactly. That's what I would bring, and I think I would bring my. No, I can't think of anything. That's it.
All right, and if you could jump into a time machine, go to any place, time in history for 30 minutes, who would you talk to?
Oh, I would talk to Patti Smith, actually, the author of Just Kids. This is probably the most beautifully lyrical book I have ever read, and she actually gave me the definition of what it means to be an artist. So I have a lot of questions for her and her experience.
Mm-hmm. And this personal question I'm throwing in is, dude, you're like one of the most yoked productivity people on YouTube. How many hours? How long do you work out a day?
Oh man, not that many. So the truth of the matter is that genetics help a lot. It's like 80% there. However, I do work out daily I run like 2-3 miles a day, if not, bike 6 miles and stuff like that. So I wake up pretty early. My morning routine is very consistent. It's literally wake up, my running shorts are hanging off of the door, literally, and I just like put it on, and I'm like out the door, put on my running shoes. I run, get my body internal body heat up. I come back and take literally an ice cold shower. Jump in that shower, right? It's great. And I come out. Yep.
Oh, keep going.
Yeah, no, and I try to get that sunshine, right? Like per Andrew Huberman, he really got me on that sunshine, like 15 minutes a day and stuff like that, because it helps. If I wake up too early, sometimes I'll actually, especially with daylight savings, I'll actually have like a grow light, kind of like a plant grow light, and then shine it in my face and stuff. So basically, it's exercise in the morning, cold shower plus sunlight, and I'm like ready to go for the rest, like at least half the day.
Nice. And what motivates you?
In what way? Which one? I guess
in general, but broadly, life-wise.
Oh man. I just want experience. I really do want to, like, honestly, I used to be so obsessed with impact. But it's interesting because my verb is no longer to serve. It was that for the last 7 years. But it changed actually 2 weeks ago. When I realized that it's now to illuminate. And illumination, if you think about sunlight, right? It's not forceful. It's not trying to like serve you necessarily. It's trying to actually just like shine some light into whatever darkness or give you some warmth if you need it. But it's very light. Photons are not really like, even molecules necessarily. So in that respect, it's almost kind of like I want to experience and just glow and create, and first of all for myself, and then second of all, if I can illuminate part of the world for you, then all the better for it. But it's not forceful.
Interesting. I love it. Yeah, when I studied yoga in India, I learned that the word guru, it's the one that removes the darkness from the light, or like it's what does success look like for you?
I would say that success would mean that what I do is actually, I mean, what I love doing is also financially sustainable. I think this is what every creator and every artist is really looking for, which is like we can make an impact in the world and we can be financially rewarded for it, because that's actually just part of like thriving, really, while building those connections and living a fulfilling and interesting life. I think it's fundamental. It's just a human being thing. That's what connects us, really.
And in terms of just overall takeaway for that one person out there that's listening today, after this whole epic conversation, like what's like the one thing that you hope they take away?
Nothing matters and everything matters. Just remember that, right? That's literally I think the key of human existence is that, we are here for such a brief amount of time, yet we feel like everything does matter. So really determine, what matters to you, right? And just empty the cup now and then, because it's gonna help you a lot in pretty much like every decision making, the way you feel, because ultimately, our reality is shaped by our perceptions and how we ultimately like, judge it. So, recalibrate. This is why I do so much reflection, so it's really important.
I feel like we could have another 5-hour podcast just off of that. All right. Well, what's the best way for people to connect with you? I know you're doing a lot of coaching, people that want to make better decisions with their businesses, their careers, their lives. You have the Mind Map Nation, connecting people that want to think more deeply. You have your YouTube channel, your newsletter. Like what are ways that people can basically learn more about that, connect with you?
I would say join Mind Map Nation. because I genuinely like social media and online. You can ping me on Instagram on, Sheng Silver or TikTok or comment on YouTube or whatever it is. But honestly, the most rewarding interactions that I've had, and it's probably going to be best for you also, is actually through the community, because I actually hold live events every other week, right? And sometimes like three, 4 times a month. On average, it's actually almost one live event per week, and we always have great conversations. Like we always come out learning a lot, right? The other thing is that if you're in need of help of mind mapping, the chaos in your life, doesn't matter if it's professional or personal, my coaching service is really expensive. It's like right now it's $500 per hour, right? The reason why I created My Map Nation is to make myself more readily available for people who need that help. Actually, just the other day, we had a guy who messaged me, DM me on Instagram. And he's facing a lot of like career issues and stuff, multiple dead ends in the career. He's trying to map out the career transitions map that I taught on YouTube. And he joined My Map Nation, jumped on our office hours yesterday. And I spent like 40 hours with other people, essentially just like, real time mapping it out, and it's really helpful. So take advantage of that. It's like $15 a month or something. It's like a Netflix, thing, but I promise you it'll be worth your time. Just
I'm probably going to sign up and then take the 7-day course to mind map out all the questions that I've been overthinking for like years. I was like, I need to do mind maps.
No, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, everyone out there, for tuning in. Live Joyfully Design, Creator Pad, Rob, Sven, everyone else out there that's listening today. And Sheng, thank you so much. I just really appreciate how, just first, like you just coming on the show, spending all this time with me, chatting today, sharing your experiences, your perspectives with the audience. I really do think it's helped me illuminate a lot of things in my life. Just watching your videos has been super inspiring. I'm like, oh, maybe I should get up at 5 a.m. workout, get like a cycle. Like you're seriously super inspiring, man. And I think I really just appreciate how thoughtful you are, but it's also in the service of your own self-discovery, but ultimately for serving and helping other people. And I just really, really appreciate about that about you. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming on the show today.
For sure. No, it's been such a joy, Peter. Like, thank you for having me. Like, you're doing a fantastic job. I'm taking inspiration actually as well from you. So keep going.
All right. Thanks. Well, I'm going to end the broadcast. Just stay online for a bit. Okay.